Welcome to r/Am I the Jerk, where Karen ruins the barbecue. Am I the jerk for telling my wife that she needs to pay me back for the brisket I bought since she made a mistake? My wife is extremely picky about what meat she eats. She usually will only eat chicken and fish. Red meat she refuses to eat or cook, which is fine. Tomorrow is the 4th of July and my family is having a barbecue. I volunteer to take the brisket. Smoking a brisket takes 12 to 18 hours and the meat needs to be thawed out. It can take about 24 hours to thaw completely in the fridge. My job called me out on Monday to a site and problems caused me to stay over 2 nights. I was planning to use the frozen brisket from the freezer, but it needed to be thawed out beforehand. On Tuesday, I realized that my job was going to keep me and I asked my wife to move the brisket from the freezer to the fridge so that it can thaw out. A task that would have taken maybe a single minute. She told me okay, and I thought that was it. I came home today and it wasn't in the fridge, it was still in the freezer, hard as a rock. I can't even use it. So I go to the store and I have to buy a new one. I asked my wife why she didn't do what I asked her to, even though she agreed to do it. She told me that she thought it was gross, so she didn't. This started an argument. I'm upset that she agreed to do me a simple favor and then she didn't even do it and I had to buy one from the store. I told her she needs to pay me back for what I bought. She thinks that I'm being a huge jerk and overreacting. Edit. We have a shared account for all the bills and whatnot. The meat came out of my account, which is why I want her to pay me back. Not the jerk. You asked for a favor, which she agreed to do, and then she didn't do it, so she lied to you. Then you had to go out of your way and buy a new one so that it can be cooked on time for the barbecue, which briskets are not cheap. She should pay you back. Also, she showed you that you can't even trust her with basic things. You're right, it would have taken a single minute. Not the jerk. I don't know what else to say. This is so baffling. Does she have an actual phobia of cow meat or something? Even saying the task would take a single minute is an exaggeration. Unless you have a freezer in a different location from your fridge, this would just take seconds. She could have worn oven mitts to avoid touching it. So many of these stories remind me why I'm so happily single. I would have no patience for someone who did this, and then I would feel petty for being enraged about something so minute. Am I the jerk for refusing to help my wife and her friend anymore? Plus final update. My wife, Emily, has a longtime friend, Leslie, who has recently become a single mother. Leslie does not have a working vehicle at the moment and is working 2 jobs, so Emily took it upon herself to help Leslie out as much as she can. Emily had started asking me to help as well in driving Leslie and her kids around, taking them to school and appointments, taking Leslie to the grocery store, etc., whenever Emily or someone else couldn't. I agreed since it made my wife happy and I understand the kind of situation Leslie is in. Helping has turned into Emily inviting Leslie and her kids over often, or organizing trips that they would like, such as going camping or fishing. A few times, my wife was unable to attend these get-togethers she organized due to work and insisted they could still take place, leaving me to entertain Leslie and her kids on my own. Since I've known of Leslie my entire relationship with my wife, I didn't think too much about this. The times that it has been me left with her, or sent in Emily's stead to shuttle Leslie around, I've made normal small talk with her and her kids. Recently, Leslie's kids were going to be away for a weekend, so Emily wanted to have Leslie over for dinner and some movies. She asked me to text Leslie to ask her over, and when I did, Leslie replied with, "Just as friends, right? I'm not interested in being anyone's girlfriend." I thought that response was out of left field, so I asked her why she'd even say that, and her response was pretty much, "No guy would be asking me and my kids how we're doing or helping me out unless he wanted something in return." I told Leslie it wasn't anything like that, and then I showed my wife the conversation and then informed her that I would be stepping back from helping her with anything involving Leslie and to leave me out of any future plans. I also offered to show her the rest of my phone and anything else. Emily believed me, but she still talked to Leslie about it to see what had given her that impression, and accordingly, she gave Emily the same answer. A few days later, Leslie apologized to Emily and told her that her emotions and mind were just all over the place because of a down day. That's fine, but I'm still not willing to help her or my wife out anymore because I don't want any repeats or accusations hurled at me when I was just helping as my wife asked. Emily thinks I'm overreacting and should just brush it off because it was just a silly miscommunication that she had on a bad day. Am I the jerk? Additional info. The text I sent Leslie about the night was, "Emily wants to know if you'd like to come over for dinner and some movies on Saturday." That's why her response was so out of left field. I sent the text because Emily was busy on her phone and wanted to know ASAP so we could make our weekend plans. Edit. Thanks for the comments and the different perspectives. I'll talk to Emily tonight when we get home about the overhelping and what to do going forward. Leslie knows that we're completely monogamous, and while I will be bringing up concerns she's helping too much, this level of help between the two of them has been present for as long as I've known my wife. Not the jerk, but why is your wife so suddenly attached to this woman? If I were Leslie, I'd be wondering more if your wife wants a girlfriend more than you. OP, they've always been attached at the hip. When my wife had surgery for carpal tunnel, Leslie kept showing up even when I was home to take care of Emily in the house. Add in that my own sister is similar with some of her close friends, I never found their relationship strange. Info. How long have you and your wife been acting as Leslie's chauffeurs and doing everything for her? What is Leslie's plan to get her own life back together? OP. It's been about 4 months. Leslie's trying to save up to get a new used car or her current one fixed, as well as looking for a cheaper place to live. Not the jerk, but only because Leslie didn't apologize, and I don't think you're in the wrong for not helping her anymore. This is kind of a weird situation. Like if my friend asks to go fishing with me and my kids, then sends her boyfriend or her fiance or husband in her place, that's pretty weird. If it was just an errand, that's one thing, but a whole trip, that's just weird. I would cancel the plans at that point. Also, was this fishing and camping trip just you, Leslie, and her kids, or were there others involved? So I can actually kind of get Leslie's side, because this time you directly texted her from your phone, right? When your wife sets up these errands and playdates, I'm guessing she initially says it'll be her, then crap might come up, so maybe half the time she then tells Leslie that you're going. So a direct text to Leslie from you asking to come over for movies kinda does feel pretty off. Also, I'm curious to know what Leslie's exact text messages said. OP. My wife made the camping trip. Out of the fishing trips, when my wife couldn't make it, and we knew ahead of time, we discussed canceling. She discussed it with Leslie, and they both decided to go ahead with it. The other time my wife organized us all going to do something together, she was with us for about an hour before she had to leave. I did directly text her from my phone, which I've had to do before. My text read, Emily wants to know if you'd like to come over for dinner and watch the movies on Saturday. I don't know about 100% of the time, but I have heard my wife tell Leslie she'd be sending me in her stead on a number of occasions, so it's not as if Leslie doesn't have a heads up. Not the jerk. Did she apologize to you in addition to Emily? That's what kinda sets it off. She can have an off day and feel like maybe everyone has an ulterior motive and get snappy, but like, she needs to apologize to the person she hurt, you. If you're worried she's going to make a move on you and she's done more than this comment, that's different too. OP. No, she did not apologize to me, only to Emily. Update. My wife and I had a long conversation after I made this post. I brought up points from both my perspective and possible points from Leslie's perspective that commenters made to explain the situation and why it had me uneasy enough to step back. I showed her the post and she eventually relented. Emily decided she would speak with Leslie again to find out what was going on with her, why she was so uncomfortable. We also discussed the matter of overhelping. In that regard, Emily wanted to keep helping her as she had been because that level of help is normal for them, but she would stop asking me to help when she couldn't. Instead, she said she would talk to Leslie about getting the kid's father to help out more now that her ex-fiance was gone. She wound up agreeing I should have received the apology, but since I'm just hands-off now, I didn't see the point in pursuing it. I'm happy to say I have not been volunteered to help or drive since our talk. She continued to help Leslie as she was able to for a couple of weeks until things took a turn for the negative. There were a couple of times neither my wife or Leslie's other friends were able to give her a ride or help her, and she asked Emily where I was and why I couldn't do it. Emily told her that it was best I didn't to avoid any future misunderstandings. After the 4th time Leslie asked my wife to have me drive her or pick stuff up for her when no one else could, Emily tells me that Leslie started in about how if what she said wasn't true, then I wouldn't be avoiding her, but I'm acting as if I got rejected. According to Emily, Leslie started to draw parallels about how I went out of my way to do things for Emily right before we got together and started helping Leslie. So that was all the proof Emily should need about me having ulterior motives. And after that, she says Leslie devolved into telling Emily she'll wind up being left too. We have minimized contact with Leslie, and Emily told her she needs to do so until or unless Leslie seeks counseling for her breakup and stops having a negative outlook on the relationships around her, and then they can rebuild their friendship. That has been hard on Emily, so whenever I'm not working, I'm doing what I can to help her get through this. Thank you again, Reddit, for the fresh set of eyes. Am I the jerk for telling my boyfriend that I don't think it's appropriate for him to attend our family vacation? I'm 21, female. My boyfriend, who's 23, let's call him Charlie. Around a month ago, my mom mentioned a family vacation while on a call with me. Charlie and I have been together for about a year now. He has still not met my mom's side of the family, only my dad's. My mom, who's 42, lives in my home country together with my stepdad, who's 50, and my stepbrother, who's 24. He lives there too, but not in our hometown. Because of this, he hasn't had the chance to meet them yet. Yesterday, I mentioned to my best friend, who's 21, who I've been friends with for almost 17 years now. I was on the phone with her. She's still in the city we grew up in and goes to university there. Because of that, she often sees my parents. My mom invited her, like any other vacation, and this time she decided to come along. The trip is fully paid for by my stepdad and my mom. My stepbrother will be bringing his fiancée also, who's 21. Charlie was in the room while I was on the call and asked me what he should pack. I looked at him confused and asked if he's going somewhere. He said that he needs to know what to pack for the trip. I laughed and thought he was joking since I never said he was coming with me. When I realized he was serious, I set him down and I told him that he isn't going to be able to come on this trip and there was no reservation for him. Plus, it will be very inappropriate to invite him over, knowing that this is a family trip and it'll make a bad impression, like he's trying to go along just because it's going to be free. They've never met him and there aren't any rooms left. He doesn't have a passport and other reasons that I tried to explain. He flipped out on me, calling me names, saying that I'm probably cheating on him and that's why he's not invited. I tried explaining, but he left the apartment. He hasn't returned since yesterday, and at 4 a.m. I have to leave for the airport. I'm worried sick. I've called many times and texted, but he's not responding. So, am I the jerk? Update. When I was leaving from the apartment 4 days ago, I left a key with my neighbor. Yesterday, she called me to inform me that my boyfriend's stuff is missing, and my writing studio and my manga collection are destroyed. Some of my savings are stolen, and yesterday he tried to empty my bank account, but he failed miserably. $5,000 are apparently missing from the drawer of my nightstand, and boyfriend is nowhere to be found. Lucky me, my stepbrother's fiance's mother is a lawyer. Mom's side of the family are trying to calm me down and get me away from the situation as much as possible. I thought this was a minor problem in the beginning, but here we are. Dad's side of the family is telling me to drop the charges and that I'm overreacting. Yes, I did place charges. I'll have to deal with it further when I get back, but police are already on the hunt for him. Malicious compliance with the law. This is a story from my first job as a paperboy at 13. Even at a young age, I was always a bit of a nightmare to manage. As soon as there was any show of an unfair treatment, I've always made it my mission to know all the regulations and work only within them. If an employer shows no flexibility to me, they sure as heck aren't getting any back from me. Onto the story. It was a great first job. My round started just around the corner from my house and a small loop left, my last delivery 3 doors down from my home. There were usually no complaints about time. I used to show up just after 7 to pack my bags and the papers were delivered by 7:45, even on the busiest day. We had a new manager start at the shop and apparently there were some people complaining that their papers were not delivered early enough. We were told we had to be in the shop by 6:30 going forwards. In the UK, there are regulations on when a kid is allowed to work, and given this new change and how it was a deterrent to my life, I started to research to see if anything could be done. I found out 2 things. Firstly, minors couldn't work before 7 a.m., and secondly, you could not deduct money from wages for mistakes, something that was happening regularly every time there was a customer complaint. Armed with this information, I told the manager what he was proposing and his current way of running the deliveries was illegal, and he needed to come up with a better plan. I'm not sure he liked being told this by me when I was 13, so he fired me immediately. The newsagent in question was a national chain, so I wrote to their head office detailing the situation and what I intended to do next. I stated that they were not following labor laws and I would report to the relevant agency. I pointed out that it wasn't a great look that when this was brought to their attention, I was fired and nothing changed. I stated that I intended to raise a legal claim for unfair dismissal based on the nature of my dismissal. I also gave them notice of my intent to go to the press to see if they felt there was a story to a national brand ignoring labor laws and dismissing someone who brought that to their attention. I asked for a response in 30 days or I would start to make the appropriate arrangements. Well, it took 2 weeks before I was asked to come into a meeting with my ex-branch manager and his boss. I took my dad as a witness, but he encouraged me to lead the meeting. There was some backpedaling. They stated they had made changes. We were now expected in at 6:45 to do the sorting before going on our deliveries at 7. They had given everyone a pay raise and a bonus, which would be paid weekly if no mistakes were made. They offered me my job back. I refused. I told them while the pay situation seemed fair, they were still asking people to come in before 7 a.m., and this was against the law. I stated if they didn't want me to take this further, they needed us to be there at 7 a.m. and they could get our bags ready for delivery, or we could be there at 7 and be out for delivery at 7:15. The choice was theirs, but their interpretation of the law was wrong, and I wouldn't back down on my actions unless changes were made. They agreed to my points and then offered me my job back, but there was a confidentiality clause. I stated I was not comfortable with this, and I told them that if they were trying to buy my silence from approaching the press, there would be a cost attached to it. In the end, I got my job back, a 20% raise for everyone working the same job, and a weekly bonus on top, a strict 7 a.m. start time, and to top it all off, 500 pounds to sign the confidentiality clause. Moral of the story, make sure whoever you're trying to do over isn't a petty little jerk who's willing to put more time and effort into ruining you than he is at school. Am I the jerk for refusing to let my sister's dogs come to our barbecue? I, 33 female, am hosting a barbecue for my and my husband's families. It's our first summer living in this house. We have a large fenced-in backyard, and we've been looking forward to being able to host things like this. We invited both our families and spent a lot of time and money into planning, getting food, etc. My sister, 35 female, texted me this morning saying how excited her babies were to see our new yard and to see the family. By her babies, she means her 4 dogs. All of them are medium to large, all of them jump on people, all of them will steal food, and she has a habit of never cleaning up after them. It would be bad enough that her dogs are poorly trained, but I use mobility aids, and her dogs could very easily knock me down. I purposely don't go to her house for that reason. I informed her that the dogs were not welcome, citing mostly that they're a fall risk for me, despite there being a multitude of reasons I don't want them here. She called me a jerk, said I shouldn't have called it a family barbecue if all of her family wasn't invited too, that I should have told her from the get-go that her dogs weren't welcome. They were never allowed at our previous apartment either, which she knew, so I didn't think to tell her they couldn't come to our new house, that I shouldn't allow my nieces and nephews over because they also could knock me down, as could our son, he's 7, and went off on me. Now my parents are calling me, trying to get me to compromise and allow her to bring the dogs because the yard is big enough, the dogs shouldn't bother you, and that they'll help manage them. Between both of our families, there will be over 20 people here. I don't want to add the chaos of her dogs. They think I'm being harsh and that I should look at it from my sister's point of view, that almost all of the siblings from both my husband and my side have kids, and the dogs are like her kids. Am I the jerk for still refusing to let the dogs come? Update. The barbecue was wonderful. We're headed out to see fireworks right now. Sister did come to the barbecue, but she did not bring her dogs. She opted instead to throw passive-aggressive comments around the entire time she was here. Upon coming to the deck and seeing the backyard, it was immediately, "Oh, the babies would have loved being able to play back here." When I mentioned to my husband how sweet it was to see our kid playing with all of his cousins in the yard, she mumbled, "Not all of his cousins." I didn't let her comments get the reaction out of me that she wanted. She stayed for less than an hour because she couldn't leave the dogs home alone for too long, and she couldn't find a dog sitter last minute. I did tell her I was sorry she couldn't stay and to make herself a plate to go. My husband caught her trying to take an extra rack of ribs, multiple steaks, and way too much meat for one person. When he stopped her, she got loud, saying, "You guys said my babies couldn't come, so the least you could do is feed them." He shut that down quickly, stating that we didn't buy and make all this food for her dogs. She stormed out after that. My parents didn't apologize, but they also didn't defend her behavior or say that I should have just given in. They just pretended like nothing happened, and they didn't try to pressure me to give in earlier. So aside from about 40 minutes, it was great. I did tell my brother about the texts and everything from earlier, and he was fully supportive. He can't stand her dogs. He did make the joke, "Why do you think I never host family stuff?" Am I the jerk for saying, I didn't realize I could love a person this much in front of my fiance after having our baby? I gave birth a few weeks ago to our daughter. As I held her for the first time and looked into her eyes, I said, I didn't realize I could love a person this much, and I cried. She's perfect and beautiful. My mom looked at me and said that feeling never goes away, which made us both ugly cry. It was a really special moment. My fiance was quiet, but he smiled. But later he privately said that he was hurt. He said he loved us both the same, and me saying that made it seem like I loved our daughter more than him. I just gave him a, "Are you serious?" look, and he dropped it. But yesterday, he brought it up again. I told him that honestly, yes, I love and cherish our daughter and have never experienced this kind of love for another human being. He said most normal people would agree with him that that's a hurtful comment and would take offense to it due to the implication. Am I the jerk? Update. So I had a heart-to-heart with my fiance, and we came to a few conclusions together. It went very well. We read through the post and the comments together. 1. He wasn't jealous of our daughter's role in my life, but rather our bond together. He didn't have that instant love connection that we read about all the new parents having, like what I experienced. I didn't realize this was actually very normal for new dads, and new moms too. Thanks for educating me. We're the first in our social circle to have kids, so we didn't have a lot of IRL people to inquire about it. His perspective is, I love this human being we made, but I don't know her, while I was thunderstruck. He hasn't had that connection, so doesn't get it yet, and that will take time, months or even a year. I'll be more patient and aware of this and read up more on new dad experiences to learn more. 2. He also agrees he not only could have expressed that better, but also choose better timing. Voicing it to me after a 14-hour labor, and then again when I'm exhausted and grumpy with achy body is probably not the best time. He also agrees marriage counseling would be good just because. We are both opinionated, logical thinking engineers who, at the same time, love each other deeply. We could use better mediation than Reddit. No offense, guys. He was not furious about me writing this Reddit post. We laughed at the comments telling me to break up with him, but we also really enjoyed reading the experiences of new parents. It helped us both feel validated and sane and see each other's perspectives better. Not the jerk. Actually, most normal people would not agree with him, as you can see by the replies. There seems to be a lot of jealousy involved. My love for my kids is unconditional. My love for my partner is not, and I'm sure it's the same for him. Not the jerk. This. No matter how much I love my partner, there are some things that would make me have to walk away, but I would never walk away from my kids. Not the jerk. I'm quite certain I'm number 5 to my wife, maybe number 6. There's 3 kids ahead of me, our dog, and then me. She has a twin sister, so there's a good chance that I'd come after her as well. Actually, yeah, I do. Okay, so I'm number 6. Guess what? I don't give a hoot. It's all love. There are different kinds of love as well. Your future husband is insecure and in a really weird way. Sad, really. Put your foot down and squash that crap. He's acting pathetic. He needs to grow up. Do not cater to that behavior. It's gross. You're the jerk. This is why most marriages fail. You're supposed to love your partner first and foremost above all else. Your love for them is part of the love you have for your family you create together. But this mindset that so many seem to have of, my kids are more important than my spouse, is why families break apart. You don't respect or love your spouse the way you're supposed to. You can't put your spouse in second place now that there's a baby. You can't just disregard them like that. He made a mistake having a kid with you. But I guess as long as he's willing to accept that he as your husband will never be the top priority in your life, it might work out. He might as well have married a single mom. Not the jerk. I've been with my husband for 40 years, and to this day, I love my 2 adult daughters more than my husband. He knows it and is okay with it. It's a different kind of love. It's endless, selfless, without conditions. It's to the soul kind of love. Your husband needs therapy to get over being jealous of his own baby. It's not her job to help him process those feelings. He can get a therapist for that, or read a self-help book. She has enough on her own mind right now without being burdened with being her boyfriend's therapist. Karen hotel guest wants a $600 upgrade for free. I was covering an overnight shift, and just as I started, I get a call asking how much one of our suites are. Our website price was around $950 before taxes and fees for this suite, which is what I relayed to this person. They said that's fine and they'll be there shortly. 2 families enter the hotel a little while later, and it was the people that called. It was 2 couples. Both their wives had sleeping babies in their hands. Both the men had a bunch of luggage in their hands. The guys come up to me and say that they're all tired, then asked me if we could let them into the room just to put their babies and bags down real quick. Normally, I'm very strict, but I decided to be nice and let them up. Well, they took their sweet time coming down, and I eventually sent security up to tell them they have to come down and provide a card. Eventually, they came down to talk to me. Them. Hey, so the wives are going to lose it if we spend $950 before taxes. Since nobody else is going to use the room overnight, can I just book a regular room and you just upgrade us to this room? Me. No, sir. I told you over the phone how much the price would be. A standard room is $350 before taxes, and we are sold out on them tonight. Either way, I can't give you a $600 upgrade for free. Him. How about I just book a cheaper suite and you just upgrade us to this one? Me. Unfortunately not. If you want this room, it'll be $950 before taxes. Him. Then we can't stay in that room. Do you have 2 regular rooms we can stay in instead? Me. Frustrated that they already dirtied the room. We are sold out of regular rooms and only have suites. If you want 2 rooms, the price is going to be $550 before taxes for each room. Them. So it ends up being even more. Okay then, we'll just stay in this room, but the wives are going to lose it. Please, what can you do? Nobody is going to use the room. Just upgrade us. Me, still trying to be nice. If you could get an upgrade just because you came late, then everybody would come late, sir. That isn't exactly how it works. But I'll just lower it down to $850 before taxes, and that's the most that I can do. All right, thank you. Let us just go upstairs and get our cards. 20 minutes later. We spoke to the wives. $850 before taxes is still not good enough. They're gonna lose it. Can you make it $800 total, including taxes? Me. No, I can't do that. It'll be $850 before taxes. Trust me, your GM would rather that you just give it to me for $800 total instead of having us leave. Nobody is going to use the room. You'd get in trouble for losing revenue. I give him a call to double check on whether I can give them that deal or not. After the call, me. Okay, I spoke with the GM and he approved the $800 total. Oh wow, this is disgusting. Our wives just sent us pictures from the room. The carpet has toenail clippings on it, and he named some other dirty things in the room that were definitely placed by them. This is absolutely nasty. Our wives are shocked. You need to give us more of a discount. Call your GM back right now and tell him about this. Me. We already gave you a huge discount on the room. There's nothing else we can do. What do you normally do when guests find things like this in their room? You don't do anything for them? Me. Guests normally don't find those kinds of things in their room. But if they did, we'd clean it up for them, then give them a discount or offer to move rooms. Then why can't you do that for us? We already gave you a discount. Call your GM back and let him know what we found. The GM will usually be fine with a discount, but as soon as someone tries to take advantage, he gets angry. I speak with him, then speak with the guests. Me. So, I spoke with the GM, and he's taken back his offer of $800 total. So, if you'd like the room, it'll be $850 before taxes. What? I don't understand why you'd do that. The room is dirty. We should be getting more of a discount. If you want to stay, it's $850 before taxes. Those are his words, not mine. Well, we don't want to stay in a dirty room. Can you ask him if he can give us a discount on the 2 rooms? Me. Over the phone, he told me no more discounts on anything. If you want the 2 rooms, they're each $550 before tax. If you want this room, it's $850 before tax. This is highly unusual. Nothing against you, but what kind of GM takes back an offer for a discount? I've never been at a hotel that operated like this. You'd rather lose money than just upgrade us to the room? I don't know, sir. You wanted me to talk to the GM, I did, and I was told not to give you any discounts. A little more complaining by them, then they split the charges. Then I finally checked them in and they went to their room. I placed a warning for the morning shift to watch out for these guests and to not do anything for them if they try to get a discount or a late checkout. They ended up checking out without causing any problems. Speaking of hotels, what was the coolest hotel you've ever stayed at? Please let us know. Disney Hotel all day, bruh. Fire my boss? Hide millions from your client? I don't think so. This happened a while ago, but it's still so fresh in my mind. I left college with a business degree in one hand and no job in the other. And like so many colleges, the promises of alumni willing to give jobs to graduates could not have been further from the truth. So I had to seek out my start from the bottom. I found a good job in operations at a company. I can't say who without giving it away. Had a great boss who taught me pretty much everything I needed to know. Work was great and the money was good. I need to explain how the business worked so you can understand how the plan worked. The corporate office was in California and we were not. There are a lot of things that went on at this company, and I can't get into all of them because it would just take away from the story. But let's just say they had a very Stratton Oakman vibe when it came to sales. I started out working in operations with some of the smaller clients, but with some help from my boss, was able to climb the ladder rather quickly to the point of being over all the operations and order processing for the firm. We had a very large client, 90% of the company's business. The way it worked was, we had two sets of sales reps, TSRs and CSRs. TSRs were the heavy hitters who reached out to the other big businesses and tech firms to extend their warranties on a product. They made real good money. The CSRs were more of the mom and pop crowd and the inbound sales calls for those that wanted to extend their warranties. The reps were all given codes that associates their clients' files with theirs, so if someone did a renewal automatically, they would get paid as it was their client. Pretty sweet gig. The client hired the firm to be the middleman for their B2B as they handled all of their everyday clients. For every $100 that came into our firm, 18% or $18 would be for the company and the rest would be sent to the clients with the warranties activated. Most of the clients paid by credit card or PO with a wire transfer, but there would also be a good amount of checks each week and would need to be processed. A little while after I started, the client check portion was now going to be overseen by one of the sales managers. Didn't really faze me because I was working on the smaller accounts. Since we were a publicly traded company, all the sales reps' orders had to go to operations to be fulfilled. They weren't allowed to process them on their own. This is when things started going downhill. My boss at the time was given temporary access to the financials as they were hiring a new CFO and he had a background with it. We went to lunch like we had done plenty of times before, but he seemed different. When I asked him if something was wrong, he told me that something looked off with our biggest client for one of the accounts. He wanted to make sure before he said anything to the higher-ups. While this was going on, I had been offered the chance to be our new compliance officer, which means I would need to make sure everything was on the up and up. Soon after, I come in to find out that my boss was just terminated for a multitude of reasons, all of which had to be untrue, because he was a pretty well-liked guy with not just the company, but with our clients as well. As I log into my terminal, I see that before he left, he had given me admin access to his files. Here's where things started to pop off. Remember those checks that clients were sending in to renew their warranties? Well, we were cashing them all right. Apparently, we just weren't adding those renewals to their products in the system. That would have triggered a payout to our client who, as you remember, would be getting 82% of that money. Instead, they were cashing the checks, keeping the money, and using the interest in the accounts. Yes, in the mid-2000s, banks actually paid interest to cover losses in their collections department. It was wild to see that this was happening and something had to be done. So I hatched a plan. First things first, secure a new job, because it won't be a fun place to work after this. Done. My previous boss knew of other companies that would scoop me up. Put in my notice and stated in my exit interview that I just couldn't be a part of what was happening, even though HR was in on this. I wanted it on the record. Next, get approval for overtime for all operations crew to come in on a Saturday and double pay them. They arrive early Saturday, obviously not too thrilled as to why they are there. But then I explain that if they complete the task, not only do they get their overtime, but they get nice bonuses. They were much happier. They spent the entire day applying all of those checks dated back years to the client accounts. We're talking millions of dollars. When all of the sales reps arrived Monday, they were shocked as heck. Not only did they meet their weekly goals before picking up the phones, they made their monthly and quarterly goals too. 2 weeks into the new quarter. Cheers, partying, yelling, screaming, celebrating, except sales management. They went from being really excited to skeptical to confused to, oh no, in about 2 hours. They realized where it must have came from. Because not only did the company hit all of these sales, since it had been over a day, the client came into work Monday to see a very nice payday in their system as well. And like anyone, would have questions and says they're coming out to congratulate the team on such great numbers. So management starts scrambling because they can't figure out how this happened, and all under my boss's old login. On my last day, I arrive and in the lobby. I've got my box ready for the last of my things. Guy walks up as we're waiting for the elevator and he strikes up a conversation with me. He notices my box and jokes about getting fired, and I just tell him I had a great opportunity come up, so I decided to leave before crap hits the fan. We laughed. Really nice down-to-earth guy. He realizes we're getting off on the same floor. He asks if I work for X. I say yes. He asks where. I tell him operations, and he reveals that he is the CEO of our client. We go our separate ways. Client shows up, and there's a big party. Afterwards, the client says that they would love to get a breakdown of where most of the sales came from so they can allocate more money to that department. Management says sure, but it made up a lie about how they can't share client payment info due to regulations, blah blah blah. Cue my exit from the company. 2 weeks go by and I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. When I get off work, I checked it to find out it was the CEO of the client where I used to work. He has had something come up and would like to talk to me. Of course, I'm nervous as heck, but I call him back and he picks up on the first ring and we get to chatting for a bit, and he finally just asks me, "Why did you leave?" I tell him I had a great opportunity come up. He doesn't buy it and says that apparently my comment about crap hitting the fan really stuck with him and he thinks something more is going on. So after a little more prodding from him, I tell him, "Just look at collections," and that's all I can say. He thanks me and I hang up. 2 days later, he pulled the plug on the account. Apparently, my old company tried to threaten him with a lawsuit for pulling the account 3 years early. He replied with, "That's fine, because when I show the courts that I have the evidence that you committed fraud," corporate came in and cleaned house. All of the management was fired within the day. 1 month later, my friend and I had a very memorable trip to Vegas, all courtesy of our old client. Epilogue. Best part. I guess this should have been part of the story. My old boss was an adopted kid, treated his adopted parents great, while their real kids didn't, and when they passed, they left him all of their money. All of it. This was about 2008. He was in a weird place because he loved his parents and was really close to them. He went to his church to pray for his parents and for what to do with his new landfall of money. He loved working but didn't need to anymore. He left the church and went to a bar because, who doesn't? He sits next to a guy who, and this is almost out of a movie, is a developer and has run out of money to finish his development because it's 2008 and no one is loaning money. They get to talking and he thinks maybe this is a sign. I'll speed this up because I've got to run to work, but he invests in the guy's development by buying all of the houses, dirt cheap at the time, and now lives off the residual income from all of them being rentals. Life sucks because so many people do crappy things and get away with it, and it's great when good things happen to good people. Am I the jerk for calling my husband delusional for expecting me to rehire the babysitter after she read our daughter's journal? My husband and I work long shifts. We have 3 kids, and for years we've been hiring babysitters of different kinds to help with the kids. My oldest is my 14-year-old daughter, Lauren. She's been going through hard phases, and her best friend passed from leukemia in December. It impacted her hugely. She received therapy for 2 months and is doing better now, but grief has no timeline and she misses her besties so much. I do all I can to be available and lend a comforting shoulder. We got her a new journal to write down her thoughts and feelings, and she's been doing a lot better since she's had it. We were looking for a babysitter and my husband suggested his friend's 17-year-old daughter. I know her, so I said yes right away. She worked for us for weeks, but sometimes teases Lauren about her being uptight, never smiling, giving her the nickname Grinch. I had told her to stop it, but she said she was just messing with her, trying to get her to cheer up. No biggie. Days ago, while I was working, Lauren called me and was crying, saying I needed to come home. I freaked out, and when I got there, I saw the babysitter sitting with the kids. Lauren was upstairs. She said the babysitter took her journal and started reading it out loud in front of the kids while recording herself. I was upset. I asked the babysitter, and she said she was just messing with Lauren and showing her that it's okay to speak emotions out loud instead of bottling it up. She really thought she was helping her overcome her fear to express herself. I yelled, saying it wasn't her place and that she caused more trouble than ever. She apologized and swore she deleted the video, but I told her that she could no longer work for us and needed to leave. She broke down crying and apologizing to me and Lauren, but I refused to let her keep her job. I know Lauren doesn't want to be around her anymore. My husband came home and was upset that I let the babysitter go, reminding me that this was his friend's daughter and I shouldn't have made her leave. He argued that I handled this the wrong way and that I should have been the adult in this situation instead of yelling and kicking her out. I explained what she did to Lauren, but he said, "I agree with you on this. She should have known better, but she didn't. Kids her age make mistakes. What's done is done. She apologized, so we should give her another chance." He kept on about how this impacted his friendship of 14 years. Also said we're now without a babysitter and his trip is this week, so I have no choice but to let her come back, but I said no. She will never step a foot in this house again. He called me unreasonable by referring to everything as if it's mine and he shouldn't have an opinion, and said it's his house too. I ended up calling him delusional for expecting me to rehire her after the stunt she pulled on Lauren, and I won't let it happen because my daughter can't feel comfortable in her home. He got very upset for what I said and stopped speaking to me since. Am I the jerk? Edit. For those asking why we'd need a babysitter with a 14-year-old in the house, first of all, the babysitter is for my younger kids who are 6 and 4. My daughter does not need a babysitter, obviously. Second of all, my daughter is incapable of looking after her brothers for several reasons. She already made it clear, and I wasn't going to force her to do it. Besides that, hiring a babysitter became normal and is part of our lives, but this issue occurred. Well, who do you agree with? OP or her husband? Please let us know. I hope that husband gets what's coming to him. Boss shushes me when I try to warn her of a mistake. So I'm a lawyer in Brazil, but when I was at college, I got an internship at a tribunal. I usually worked behind the scenes, dealing with paperwork and some bureaucratic stuff. It was usually a nice place to work, but occasionally the judge, the boss of my boss, would require some intern to help her with that hearing. It was not unpleasant work, but more of an annoyance since we were only 8 people dealing with the paperwork of over 10,000 lawsuits, which means that every time she requested someone to go help her, they knew that there would be a lot of accumulated work when they got back. Something I need to point out about this specific judge is that she was a very polite and pleasant person outside of work, but at the court, she would become extremely micromanaging, especially about bureaucratic stuff that she never had to deal with and didn't understand, usually making our work take way longer than it needed to be. And whenever a lawyer was present, suddenly she became very rude and demanding to anyone below her. I understand that most lawyers that worked there were extreme jerks, and that this was just probably her response to that. A way to say, "Don't you try me. I know what I'm doing and I'm good at it." But I cannot agree with her taking that frustration on everyone else. On this specific day, I had been assigned to help her with a very long hearing. In Brazil, this stuff is all recorded, so for me, that meant taking care of the computer, taking notes, but mostly making sure that the camera was on. The thing is, whenever you do these recordings, it has a kind of script that needed to be followed. First, she would tell me to start recording. Then she would present herself, tell what case it was being judged, then name the first witness and show their documents to the camera to prove that we were questioning the right person. Only after that, she would start questioning the witness, then the lawyer takes turns doing the same. I'm not sure why, but she was more annoyed with me than usual that day and did everything in her power to show everyone in the room that she was the boss, and I was supposed to just do what she said without arguing. But despite that, she was talking a lot with the lawyers about trivial stuff while waiting for some witnesses that hadn't arrived yet. Finally, everyone is there and the hearing can begin. But for some reason, she was so distracted with the conversation that she forgot about the script and just started questioning the witness without doing the proper presentations and asking me to start recording. As soon as she started questioning him, I tried to discreetly warn her, but all I could say was, "Your Honor," before she loudly shushed me without looking in my direction. It was not at all discreet and everyone was visibly embarrassed, including me. So I did the only thing I could in that situation. Nothing. I couldn't start recording without the presentations and definitely not do it in the middle of the hearing, so I just sat there and waited. After almost half an hour of questioning, she asked me to stop the recording because they would do a small recess. All I could say was, "As I tried to warn you, Your Honor, the video was not recording when you started questioning him." She got visibly white and started saying, "But you should have," before realizing her mistake. She tried looking around for support, but everyone saw the way she shushed me and had that look of, "Well, he's got a point." I don't know exactly what happened after that because they did the recess anyway and I was sent back to my usual work and didn't get to participate in the rest of the hearing. It was a relief because I had a lot of work to do. I graduated a couple of days later, And I don't think there were any big repercussions about this specific mistake. But I heard a few years later that, since her productivity was extremely low, and after other, more serious mistakes, she got demoted. She's an auxiliary judge today, which means that she helps other judges but is not responsible for dealing with any lawsuits on her own. Am I the jerk? I work in publishing. Mom keeps giving my contact info to aspiring writers. I am rude to them. I'm a senior editor at a publishing house. First piece of advice I got on being hired was not to tell people I work in publishing because they'll ask me to look at their manuscript. I thought this was a joke, but the first time I told someone that I was in publishing, you get one guess what they said. My mother sees this as a bonus and wants to brag to everyone and their dog about my daughter, the publisher, and my daughter who could find the next J.K. Rowling, and my daughter who can part the Red Sea with only a green pen. She finishes her boasting with giving them my contact information. If I've asked her to stop it once, I've asked her to stop it 1,000 times, and yet I'm still getting contacted by the nephew of my mother's butcher or my cousin's girlfriend's cousin, saying Mom gave them my information so they could throw me their work. I then tell them to get lost. I even have a template that I send back to most of them saying that there is a process in place for a reason, along with an outline of this process. If they get pushy, which they always do, I respond that the reason the process exists is so people like them don't waste my time, as I could be using this time to find a manuscript actually worth publishing, which theirs clearly isn't, because if it was, they could go through the regular channels like everyone else, rather than contact me directly and request special treatment. In conclusion, I'm not kind to these people. The consequence of this is that I'm gradually ostracizing my mother from her social circles as people have begun to blame her for the way that I treat them. Mom has asked that I be nicer. I've asked her to stop putting me in this position. Mom claims that she stopped giving my info to people, and these are just the stragglers, but they just keep coming, so I'm not fully convinced that she stopped giving out my information. I told Mom that if they get pushy after they receive the template, I reserve the right to give them everything I've got. But Mom has said that I'm being really unfair, both to her and the aspiring authors, and that I'm ruining her reputation, so I need to stop being so rude. I said I will deal with them however I feel is appropriate, and this wouldn't happen if she didn't give my info out. She says she learned her lesson, so I need to stop. I said I'll stop when people stop using her as a reference. She says that I'm enjoying humiliating and upsetting both these people and her, and that the next time she hears from me, she's expecting an apology. Am I the jerk? Edit in regards to people saying that I may be costing us potentially valuable authors. If the material can stand up on its own, then they can go through the regular process, as we will be able to identify good writing. If they don't trust that we can identify good writing, then they should not be working with us. If they do trust us, but want to skip the line anyway, then they are not someone we want to work with, as this suggests that they want special treatment, which will not end with me reading their manuscript and is likely to be a recurring theme throughout working with them. Well, what do you think? Is OP the jerk or not? Please let us know. I'd probably get fed up too after a while, to be honest. Nightmare customer tries to build their own off-menu pasta dish, then gets upset when charged full price. Being a picky eater is fine, but at minimum, you have to work with the confines of what's actually available. Enter one stubborn jerk who took the menu items not as a suggestion, but as a point of negotiation. I'm looking at your pastas. Do you have any rotini? No, just spaghetti, rigatoni, fettuccine, and bow tie pasta, I believe. That page has all of the available pasta dishes we serve. Well, you should carry rotini, but I'll start with fettuccine base, and I'd like to add mushrooms, basil, bell pepper. I'm sorry to cut you off, sir, but we don't offer build-your-own pastas. We only offer what's listed on the menu, and I can make a couple modifications. Well, that's ridiculous. If you have the items, you should be able to make it. It's restaurant policy. It helps the kitchen flow. He stares angrily at me. Well then, I'm gonna need a minute. No problem, bud. I hadn't even asked if your table was ready to order before you started firing away anyway. I talked to the kitchen manager to give him a heads up, and he doubles down on not allowing grand modifications. I return after a few, and this guy's body language tells me he's already preparing an opening statement for the courtroom. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a chicken Alfredo, but instead of the cream sauce, I want bolognese, no tomatoes, I want extra mushrooms, add basil, bell peppers, no Parmigiano, and instead of chicken, I want the fresh cod. Sir, I can only do a couple substitutions, and our fresh cod is a separate dish entirely. Look, please talk to your kitchen. It's what I want. This guy seemed like he was just trying to really impress his friends, who all looked pretty mortified. I find the kitchen manager again. He shakes his head and goes, "All right, well, ring in both a pasta bolognese and a fresh fish of the day. $42 pasta. Bravo, buddy." The table gets their food, and this guy flashes me the most idiotic smirk like he just got one over on us. "See, that wasn't so hard. And by the way, it's delicious. You should think about adding it to your menu." This self-satisfied piece of work. They finally get the bill, and this dude's face is priceless. Well, there definitely was a price to his expression, about $42. "Did you really charge me for 2 entrees?" "Yes, I told you that the cod was a separate dish." He didn't even have much room to argue there. Thankfully, his friend paid and left a fat tip, probably out of vicarious embarrassment. Karen gets a free ride but won't buckle up and enjoys a nice taxi ride home. This was a few years ago, roughly 4. I worked at an office about a 45-minute drive from my house, and I had a friend who worked in the office. I would give them a ride as it was on my way, and I literally had to pass by her house to go to and from work, so it was no big deal. Well, a woman who worked in my office lived really close to her and found out about the arrangements and wanted in. She guilted my friend into asking me since it was on my way, and I said okay. Well, at the same time, my late husband's car was in the shop, so I would make a detour to pick him up, and he's a giant of a man, 6'3", and could not physically fit in the back. So to make things easier, my friend would just sit in the back. Well, the other woman, known as Karen, was a big woman, but not tall, but big. So on the way home, literally the first time she starts getting in the front, I explain to her that she has to sit in the back. Well, we get to my husband's job site, and I park and text. She jumps out of the car and gets into the front. I tell her to get in the back, and she straight up says no, because the seatbelt in the back is too tight and it hurts her. I tell her that's too bad. She can get out if she doesn't like it. Well, she gets out and goes to the back seat. My husband gets in and climbs in, and I start the car, and the seatbelt warning light is on and beeping. She has the seatbelt off. I say, "You need to put that seatbelt on." I met with a, "No, I can't. It's easier if I'm in the front." Well, I say you're in the back. We're not going anywhere until that seatbelt is on. She crosses her arms like a kid and says, "I guess we're not going anywhere." I tell her if she doesn't put the belt on, she can get out and walk home. With a nice bit of snark, she says, "Well, you better call me a taxi." That upset me, and that's what I did. I called her a taxi. She puts her belt back on, but I say it's too late. Get out. You have a taxi coming. I say you can get out of my car now, or the police will be happy to remove you. She gets out, and her jaw almost hit the road as I drove away. Outside my friend, I never let anyone from work in my car again. My Karen sister cuts me off since I can't help her financially. My family has never had a good time when I was growing up. We always struggled financially, which came to a head when both of my parents passed in the past few years. I'm a freshman in college, 19, male, and my sister is 25. She's always depended on my parents for financial support, but when they passed, my father 7 months ago and my mother around 5 years ago, that dependence fell onto me. She has problems that make it very difficult for her to work, but she is able to if that place has a good environment, nice and caring people. Her boyfriend of 5 years, however, is around 35. He can get angry at times, but he can also be a nice person. The thing about him is that he isn't able to keep a job for more than 2 weeks, either because he quits from someone disrespecting him once, or because he is laid off or fired and hasn't had a real job for around 5 to 6 months. This essentially led to me being the only person who could pay the bills for the house, even though I was working an $8 an hour job, working 13 hours a week, college work-study. I've been trying to find other jobs to work, like being an audio transcriptionist, but I don't have the time to do a lot of it because I have to juggle working towards a driver's license so I can get another job and working on an incomplete class that I had to take from the stress of everything. There were other people who offered to help her, which she took, but it soon got to the point where they stopped helping her, so she got mad and began to blame them and talking mess about them for not helping her. one of them being a former employee of mine and good friend to me and my father. He had told her and her boyfriend that he would help them if her boyfriend would go and work for him again. He had quit because he and another coworker had an argument, but he always refused and kept expecting my former employee to help them. I was talking to some of my friends, former teachers, and my current employer/supervisor about the situation, and they all had said that she should be able to take care of herself and that it isn't my responsibility to take care of her when I have my life and career to get ready for. But there's always this nagging voice in my head to help her out as much as I can, even if my bank goes negative, as it has happened once or twice already. This morning, it all led up to her calling me and asking me to send her some money for cigarettes and food. She has food stamps, but I don't know if she's used them all or not. I told her that I wasn't able to since I don't have any money to give, also because I'm currently living in the negatives with my bank, and that I had a large load of stuff that was really stressing me out. She got angry about it and hung up. She then called me again and told me that she was never going to contact me again. Am I the jerk for letting it come to this? Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or his sister and her boyfriend? Please let us know. She's actually doing you a favor if she never contacts you again. Your life's gonna be a lot better without her and that boyfriend of hers in it. Escalating feud leads to dad orchestrating his brother's arrest. My uncle has always been a self-righteous, petty slimeball with a foul temper and grandiose idea of his own importance, but little to no brains. My dad always just took it and tried to keep the peace because family is so important to him. This is the story of how my uncle finally pushed my dad too far and ended up getting arrested for his trouble. It's pretty long since it covers several months of a feud between them. As background, my dad and my uncle are neighbors in a rural community of 600-ish people. My dad built the house my uncle lives in and sold it along with a small plot, so my dad's remaining land is about 6 acres and runs along the side and the back of my uncle's smaller property. My uncle is a dealer for HVAC units. My dad is in the HVAC business and would buy some things from his brother even though his brother's prices were higher and he had a more limited inventory than other dealers, in order to help his brother out. My dad also rented a building his brother owned and used it as his shop/office. He only rented the building and parking lot, but in the field out behind the shop, my uncle and my dad both would collect old HVAC units. These things are rusty and all around ugly, but when they didn't have anything else to do, they could go get one of these old units to break down for scrap. The story starts when one day my dad went to his brother and said he needed a certain unit, but his brother quoted him a really high price, and he also couldn't deliver it in the time frame my dad needed. So my dad called up another dealer he works with, and that guy had a unit on hand to give him for a much lower price, a no-brainer. My uncle found out about this somehow. Dudes in the HVAC business are apparently like gossipy teenagers, and confronted my dad, basically giving him an ultimatum that if my dad wouldn't commit to buying 100% of his units from my uncle, then my uncle wouldn't sell him anything. I already told you, my uncle is an idiot. So my dad didn't say anything to his brother, but he took him at his word and stopped buying anything from him. A month or so later, my uncle showed up at my dad's shop and confronted him again, wanting to know why my dad hadn't ordered anything from him that month. When my dad told him why, my uncle exploded. They apparently had a screaming match, and in the end, my uncle announced that my dad was no longer his brother. They were no longer doing business together, and my dad was evicted from the shop. I will note that legally my dad was not evicted because evicting him would have required a legal note, a certain period of time, etc. But my dad was over it, so he said fine and began converting the barn at his house into his new shop. So my uncle, who apparently had thought my dad would not call his bluff, showed back up at the shop a few days later and informed my dad that he also has to move all of his old HVAC units scattered around in the field behind the property, or he would sue my dad for the cost of removal. Now, this too probably had no legal power since my dad's lease was only on the building, not the field, and my uncle contributed to and used the old units as communal property. But when my dad is upset, he's really upset. So he agreed to move the old units. He took his tractor over and loaded each one onto his flatbed trailer, drove out behind his barn, and painstakingly arranged hundreds of rust buckets, ugly old HVAC units an inch or two off the property line at the back of my uncle's house. Note that my dad could not see these things from his house due to the way his property is set up, but my uncle had an HD view of them in his backyard. My uncle started being even more of a creep than usual and was always spying on my dad's house. So my dad decided to build a privacy fence down the side of his property that runs along my uncle's property, but not the back of the property where the HVAC units are. The fence guys arrived and worked for a few hours before my uncle came screeching into his driveway and exploded out of his truck, already screaming because these poor fence guys had laid posts or tools or whatever temporarily on his side of the property line as they were building the fence. My uncle called the police, who basically told the fence guys, "Okay dudes, just don't put anything on this crazy man's property," and left. The next day, apparently, someone left a hammer across the property line, so here comes my uncle screaming at them again. He called the police again, but by the time they got there, the guy had already moved his hammer, so the police were just annoyed by this point, but could only warn them not to do it again. Later that afternoon, my uncle called the police a third time, I kid you not. This time, he wanted to report that my dad had stolen a backhoe from him, like one that attaches to the back of a tractor. One that, again, I kid you not, my uncle had given to my dad 2 whole years prior because my uncle didn't even have a tractor big enough to attach the thing to. The cop was not amused when this story came to light, and since it was the same cop who had been there earlier that day, she was beyond annoyed at that point. My dad helpfully said, "Come get the backhoe if you want it," knowing full well my uncle had no way to pick the thing up or haul it even the few feet to his own yard. My uncle replied that my dad was just trying to trap him and would say he was trespassing if my uncle came onto his land, even though the cop was standing right there when my dad offered. And by the way, this conversation was taking place in my dad's driveway. He then said that he wanted to file a complaint with the police that basically amounts to a restraining order against my dad. It isn't a restraining order because it isn't issued by the judge, but the cops treat it that way. It's for habitual trespassers. Annoyed cop helpfully informed my dad that this would mean that even if my uncle texted or emailed him and invited him to come over to his house to discuss things, even if my dad had written proof that he had been invited, if my uncle called the cops or even took a picture of my dad on his property, he could potentially get arrested for trespassing. My dad said he wanted to file one against his brother too. The pro-revenge part of this story is now upon us. My dad knew full well that his brother had no real clue where the property lines were and was not going to dig up the survey to check. He only knew where the lines were because my dad knows exactly where they are and maintains wooden stubs in the ground periodically along his property lines. So when his brother was away for a few days, my dad moved all of the old HVAC units along the property line over further onto his own property by a few feet and moved the stubs back the same distance. So basically, it looked the same as it had before, except it looked like the property line was a few feet further back than it actually is. He then placed some random pieces of scrap across the fake property line, still on his own property, but it looked like it was across the property line if all you had to go by were the incorrectly placed stubs, set up a few game cameras aimed at the line, and waited. Sure enough, his jerk brother came storming out of his house as soon as he noticed this scrap on his side of the property line, crossed the real property line to get a good look at the scrap, and called the police. My dad was waiting for them with his survey showing where the actual property line is, a copy of the report annoyed cop had given him, and game camera footage of his brother clearly trespassing on his land, and it was my uncle who got arrested. The only way his revenge for all the trouble and heartache his brother caused could possibly have been any sweeter would have been if it were an annoyed cop who showed up at the scene and arrested my uncle. But alas, he had to make do with someone he and his brother had both gone to high school with, which worked out well since it was especially embarrassing for my uncle to be arrested by someone he knew well, and who could make sure everyone else in town knew. Edit to add, nothing really came of my uncle's arrest, or at least not that my dad has heard about, and he had heard about it since this is a town of like 600-ish people. But it was probably enough for my uncle just to have to get pulled into handcuff, spend a night in jail, and have people know about it, because my uncle hasn't caused any more trouble for my dad other than generally existing where my dad occasionally has to see his truck drive by. My uncle is also now in a business dispute with his wife's sister and his brother-in-law, so presumably he's trying to take his anger out on another target, and also who isn't his older and much larger brother, who has been perfectly willing to beat him up all their lives whenever it's devolved into physical disputes. My uncle, aunt, cousin, and my cousin's wife all unfriended me on social media, so I only know what's going on with them via small-town gossip nowadays. My sister was driving down the road recently, saw my uncle in his yard and waved at him. He turned away like he didn't know her. None of us got an announcement when my cousin's wife had her baby recently, so I think the end of the story is just that we are all dead to my uncle and his family, but he is too afraid to do anything besides pretend we all don't exist. Have you ever had a dispute with a relative? If so, what was it about? Please let us know. Oh, my cousin Sharon is the worst. Is it okay if I fire you? Time frame is early 2000s for reference. In my late high school/early college years, I had a job doing telemarketing work during winter and summer breaks. While it was boiler room cold calling, we primarily were soliciting donations for agencies that had contracted us to do the work, so felt less scuzzy. Think police departments, fire departments, etc. We kept a portion of donations for operating expenses. Everything over a certain threshold went directly to the receiving party. Everybody wins. I enjoyed the job as the scripts were simple. I was allowed to read a book and such between calls, and a number of my friends were also employed there, so we could hang out during lunch breaks. The pay was a decent chunk above minimum wage at the time, so it was a good gig. I also had a knack for it, and at one point was fifth in sales. Across all their sites they had in operation, second in our building. One summer while driving to work, my car promptly dies with no warning and I'm left stranded on the road. As you do in this situation, back before cell phones for poor college students were a thing, I walk to the nearest house and ask to use the phone. I call my dad, who starts driving to get me, and call my work to let them know I'll be late. My boss says fine and that he will chat with me when I get in. Father shows up with my mother in 2 cars. I take the extra and he begins the arduous process of towing my car back to their house. This involved tying a rope to the front of the car and to the back of his vehicle and crawling back home so he could fix it himself. I've been in that back car and did not envy my father being in the back car with only 10 feet of space between him and the car my mother was driving, but I'm off to work. I arrive to work, clock in almost an hour after the start of my shift, and am promptly told by the front receptionist that my boss would like to see me in his office, so I head on back. Beginning details completed. Cue the start of the malicious compliance story. My boss and I have always had a good rapport. I'm a good worker, get good reviews, and he and I have some similar interests outside of work we can chat about occasionally. When I arrive in his office, he's shuffling some papers around and has laid out a few documents facing me. As close as I can recall, this is the conversation that followed. Boss: hope everything worked out with the car. Glad to have you here. Couple things I need to discuss with you. First of all, as I'm sure you are aware, being more than 30 minutes late to work is considered a Class C violation. 3 classes from C to A, C being the least egregious. If insufficient time is given prior to the occurrence, this is your first violation, so I'd like to talk to you about what happens next. I'm sweating at this point. I've never ever been talked to about being out of order on anything while working here, and getting my first violation scared the heck out of me. So I'm sitting there, white-faced, and he continues. Boss: no official write-up or anything occurs for a first violation, or even the first few Class C violations, but it is manager's discretion on the punishment depending on past behaviors. Now, you are a good employee, and I've put into corporate a few times to give you a raise, but because you only work during your school breaks, it is denied as you aren't considered full-time. So the papers I have here are your termination papers and an offer letter I'd like to extend to you to hire you back on again. So, in short, before I file these, I'd like to ask, is it okay if I fire you? So we go through the process of him firing me, which then allowed him to extend an offer to me to rehire me at roughly a 25% increase in pay, since he could justify to corporate the bump as he was hiring someone with experience. In talking with him, he let me know it was something he occasionally did to the high school and college workers to get around the corporate's policy of not allowing raises to people that didn't work 1,000 plus hours in a year. It was his own way of being maliciously compliant with a policy that didn't allow him to reward some people that he thought deserved it. He had been apparently waiting for me to do something that he could technically fire me for. The way their back-end systems worked, it wouldn't even show up as a break-in service, since the firing and hiring happened on the same day, and since I never worked more than the minimum 1,000 hours each year, I didn't have any tenure or anything to be worried about losing. The laugh he and the receptionist had when he walked me back to the front to introduce her to the new employee was enjoyable, and I've had a fun story to tell ever since. Entitled mom made our wedding about herself and ruined everything. My fiance and I got engaged 2 years ago. For context, we are both master's graduates working the business world and are more than competent to plan complex events such as weddings. We don't need a wedding planner for this reason, and I already had a list of venues, venue, etc. that worked with our date and budget. Cue in the mother-in-law, and she immediately wants to be involved with the planning. Okay, fine. She's been very nice to me and treats me like one of her own, which actually is part of the problem, and never had the wedding she wanted because her own mom was controlling. So I lost/gave up on some of the battles and allowed her to change the date from something important to us to a random one so her sister can come. Her sister wouldn't come on our original meaningful date because her son, my fiance's cousin, has a 51st birthday on that day. I would have been more than happy to celebrate his birthday at our wedding, but it was a no-go. So fine, we changed the date and I spend my time re-coordinating with all of our vendors. Then she starts making more demands. I must add his sister to my bridal party because it's tradition. We're friendly but not close. She doesn't usually show up at events she says yes to, and my other bridesmaids are my best friends I've known closely for well over a decade, so it was very uncomfortable. She didn't make it a question, and I was too shocked to respond at the time, like I was literally speechless. Then she complains about my dress, telling me I should get the first one I showed her, even though it was only one size and 00 and cannot be altered to my body. Plus, I liked the second one better. She hated that our reception was a 10-minute drive away. Her friends wanted it at the same location as the ceremony, even though we planned for prepaid parking and taxis. She changed our original menu to something I didn't care for. I am to blame here since I didn't want to be a complainer. I fought for every one of my decisions and was so tired, so let her do it since she offered to pay. Because of lockdown, she gave us an ultimatum to move our ceremony and reception to next year or still do the full reception this year. We can't due to restrictions, but she didn't care. If it was an enjoyable wedding planning process where I got a say for my own wedding, I would have moved it for a better experience after lockdown. But I dreaded it so much, I literally broke down when my fiance asked to push it out since I couldn't imagine going another year of being treated like a baby with no capabilities or thoughts of my own. My fiance did finally back me up and told his family we're already married, but I can't move the date out either since it's another lie I don't want to take part in. We have to lie about a lot of big decisions to his family. I get her other adult kids, mid to late 30s, are heavily dependent on her financially and emotionally, but my parents raised me to be independent at a young age and trust that they raised me well to make good decisions, so I'm just overwhelmed. Ruined wedding, but I'm planning our honeymoon, so that's the only thing I'm excited for since it will be for us. Well, what would you do in this situation? Would you let mother-in-law plan the wedding or not? Please let us know. I'd drop you like a hot potato if you let your mom ruin our wedding, Reddit boy. Am I the jerk for not calling my husband my honored husband in front of his parents? I'm a 28-year-old woman and have been married to my husband, a 32-year-old man, since 2018. My husband is ethnically Japanese and a second-generation American. His parents are from Osaka. He sort of half speaks Japanese, mostly sentences he has memorized, greetings, and his parents speak great English. On the other hand, I lived in Japan for 3 years, so I am conversationally pretty good. I've studied hard to get to the level I'm at, and I have passed level 2 of the Japanese language proficiency test. Not great, but not bad. Lately, my husband is super into me calling him Goshujin-sama, which can be translated to my honored husband. It's extremely unusual to call your own husband this, as it is usually reserved for other people's husbands as a respectful term, but it's kind of an anime/Japanese geek culture thing. I was okay with it in private because it makes him happy. Last week, went to his parents' house for dinner, and on the way over, he asked if I could call him Goshujin-sama all evening. I immediately shot his idea down with a firm no, because that would be super embarrassing. His parents are native Japanese speakers in their 60s. I'm not going to subject them to what you'd pay a waitress in a maid cafe $20 for a cup of coffee to call you. To be honest, I don't think my husband really gets how the phrase is properly used, despite his insistence. He kept trying to convince me, reminding me that he's Japanese and knows what is proper, despite the fact that I speak better Japanese than him, and I was having none of it. I just shut down and tuned him out. We got there, and sometime into the night, I called his name to ask if he wanted a drink. Despite him being in hearing range, he ignored me. I said it again, and this time he looked at me, gave me this pleading shrug, and then turned back to the TV. I didn't get him a drink and just got myself one. A while later, I said his name again, and he audibly sighed. He told me that he wanted me to call him what I call him at home, to which I responded I would most certainly not be calling him what I call him at home. This was all in front of his parents, by the way. On the car drive home, I told him that I wasn't going to call him Goshujin Sama anymore because he can't draw the line between the fun, playful couple stuff and his parents. He has sulked for the past week, and I don't even know what to do. Normally, I would not even consider the possibility that I was wrong here, but he's normally a very rational, reasonable, and respectful person. I feel like I'm being gaslighted and don't know what to do. Well, what would you do in this situation? Would you call your significant other Goshujin Sama or not? Please let us know.
I'll tell you what I'd do is I'd leave you a comment telling you how cringe it is when you mispronounce it. I watch a lot of anime and stuff, so I know these things and I'm cool.
You need to change this right now. I'd be happy to. I teach in Arizona, home of one of the most underrated education systems in America, in my humble opinion. I think we really do great work here. It's the end of the marking period, and my school has a US standard A, B, C, D, or F grading system. I teach an algebra class to 8th graders, a year ahead in our parts, who are either smart enough or their parents want them to be smart enough. Parents are allowed to opt in. It's the law. As we come to the end of the year and I'm posting grades, I'm reminded of this time last year when I got to serve up some compliance that was as delicious as it was malicious. I had a parent of one student actually come up to me in person while I was on after-school duty to discuss an issue he had with grading. For all the teachers out there, I'm feeling the wave of FERPA violation coming over you. Yes, this is true, and I told him I can't discuss grades in a public setting. I didn't get to the word setting entirely before he interrupts and says, "BS, we're at school. This is my kid. I'm the one giving permission here, so let me ask you." I'm thinking to myself, been doing that a lot lately. Great, I guess we're doing this while I'm directing traffic. I then realized the issue of safety, so I'm like, "Sir, I need to direct traffic," and then he continues talking utter nonsense. I could only imagine. I wasn't really listening at this point, while I'm looking down the road for more cars to wave down for pickup. He's just going and going. I hear a word or two like, "You said," and "He's already turned in that." And finally, as I get to a lull and look at him, he says to me, "And there's no way that you can fail my kid and put the comment, 'Pleasure to have in class.' You need to change this right now." Enter the light bulb of malicious compliance. That's my third light bulb reference today, by the way. The lull was about to pick back up when I say, "You make a good point. I don't know what I was thinking. I'll change it the second I'm done here." Which is actually possible because I always have an iPad on me pretty much at all times. My wife gets jealous. The Karen of a dad walked off back to his parked car with his kid visible and looking at me from the passenger side, and I swear he actually said, "That's what I thought," which, if you're unfamiliar, is the thing said to you when you've lost an argument that could have been a fight because you chickened out. Not responding to this is conceding defeat, usually. As the dad finishes his little strut to his car, I give the kid a thumbs up, and the kid slowly gives me a sheepish thumbs back. Hilarious. The kid seems to somehow know what the dad doesn't. The second I get to a secure, private location, I go into the grades book and change the comment from "pleasure to have in class" to "respectful to teachers and staff," which is more than I can say for this kid's dad. Needless to say, he still got an F. Deserved. And yes, I made this change on the toilet. Guest upset that windows do not open. This woman was a doozy before she even checked in. About a month ago, she called looking for an extended stay rate because she was moving. I told her for that rate, she needs to talk to sales. She would not shut up.
I'm not sure why I would have to talk to sales for that special rate when I was able to book at another hotel with it.
We're not the same hotel. I sent her to sales, and a minute later she calls back.
No one answered.
Did you leave her a voicemail?
No.
Bruh, if you leave her a message, she will call back as soon as she can. Cue her going into her allergies and hypersensitivities and how everything in the room has to be hypoallergenic and fragrance-free. That's all fine and dandy, but I'm not the one to talk to about that. Okay, ma'am, if you want that extended stay rate and to discuss hypoallergenic accommodation, You will have to talk to a manager. I have no information available to me about what products housekeeping uses, unfortunately. Cue her going into a rant again. I take her info and hand the sales manager a note. The sales manager says she's already on her list of people to call back. Last night, this woman checked in. Thank God it was someone else and not me. I warned my coworker about her and how needy she is. She joked that this lady would come back several times. This was a self-fulfilling prophecy. She comes to me at the desk. Lady,
I don't understand. I was under the impression that the window's open. It looks like they can't.
Me, no, they do not. Lady,
but I thought they did. That's why I asked for a ground floor room by the fields, facing away from the road.
Me, I'm sorry, we do not have windows that open, unfortunately. She was extremely distraught. I thought is not the same thing as knowing. She walks away and comes back.
I was under the impression that they opened and I could have fresh air.
Me, oh, did you ask us if they did? Did someone tell you they do?
No.
Then what the heck is your problem? That's on you.
I thought someone would have taken the courtesy to tell me they don't.
I have no idea what to say except sorry, and hotels usually don't have windows that open unless you have a patio. What kind of hotels have windows that open? Not many, at least in the States. That would be such a liability issue. Sorry, we did not read your mind. Am I the jerk for yelling at a lady who untied my dog while I was grocery shopping? I take my high-energy border collie for daily walks. A few days ago, I was discussing with my husband how strange I think it is when people come up and ask to pet my dog when we are out and about. Always older, overly friendly women. Sometimes these walks involve errands where I tie my dog's leash to a bike rack out front. This morning, we walked to the grocery store to pick up a few things, and I left my dog tied securely at his usual spot. As I'm heading inside, an older woman says to me,
"What's your dog's name?"
I thought to myself, oh no, I don't want to engage with her. So I just gave her a short glance and told her, and I raced into the store. I spend 5 minutes inside the store, then come back out and see this woman holding my dog. She had apparently untied him and moved him to a new spot. As I walk out, I gave her the death stare and said, "What are you doing?" She explained that she thought the spot I left him in was too wet, so she wanted to move him to the other side of the building. Then she couldn't hook the leash up, so she just decided to wait with him until I returned. I lost it on her outside of the store and told her to never touch my dog again, or he may bite her, and she should never move other people's dogs without them knowing. Now I feel somewhat guilty for yelling at her when she was probably just clueless and trying to help. Am I the jerk for yelling and leaving my dog unattended when I know this behavior exists where I live? Or is she to blame for moving and touching my dog without my permission? Edit. She was trying to move my dog to the designated dog leash hookup spot with water bowls. Unfortunately, my leash does not hook up to it. It is very common where I live to leave your dog outside while you run into a shop. Edit 2. Thank you everyone for your feedback and schooling me on dog theft. Truly never crossed my mind it could be an issue in this town. I've now decided that my pooch will be staying at home for my walks that involve errands. Edit 3. I just came back from the same store, Sans Dog, and the same lady was there. Looks like she works there out front, sanitizing and returning carts, so any speculation that she was in the process of stealing my dog can be debunked. Edit 4. The conversation with my husband and us thinking it's strange for people to ask to pet our dog was in the context of everything going on right now in social distancing. Under normal circumstances, this obviously would be fine, but older, aka more at risk, women wanting to rub their hands all over something that they don't know where it's been seems strange. Plus, coming close enough to pet the dog is breaking social distancing guidelines. Karen decides to take my iPad because she doesn't like my art. Just some basic things I'm adding to give context. I'm female, I just turned 18, and I'm new to Reddit. I live with my adoptive parents, and they are the sweetest people you'll ever know. For my birthday, my granddad got me an iPad, an Apple Pen, and a drawing app that I had been asking for. I love doing digital art, and I was definitely ecstatic when I got it. My mom was so excited for me and took me shopping to get me a case and stickers to decorate it with. The friend in question, I'll just call A, is the nicest person I've ever met. She's my closest friend, and I don't blame her for what happened. I'd gladly take a bullet for her any day. A is also 18. The person who I can't help but despise is her mother. I'll just call her Karen, because why not? Karen is 38. The son she wanted to give my iPad to, I'll just call B. B is 10 years old. Karen is a single mom and has made it the base of her personality. She runs a failing mommy blog and is used to posting parenting videos. She's a very spiritual person and believes heavily in karma and creativity. She homeschools B and doesn't teach him how to read or write, just teaches him about karma and things of that nature. With that random word vomit out of the way, I'll get to the story. Yesterday, Karen came over to drop off A so we could hang out and have a girls' day. My mom invited Karen in for coffee and let B have control of the TV remote. I immediately showed A my tablet and we both started acting like idiots and talking about color palettes. B didn't seem to care, but I caught Karen looking at us weirdly from the kitchen. I ignored it because I figured she was just watching B. A few hours went past and it started to rain. It wasn't just a drizzle, it was a downpour and there was no way Karen could drive home safe. My mom told Karen that she and B could stay in the guest bedroom and A and I could sleep in my dad's game room. It has a pull-out couch facing the TV, so we were fine. B whined that he wanted to see the game room, but my dad has a rule that no one under 16 is allowed in as he has some scary games and concept art littered around. Karen protested lightly, but my mom shut her down and she dropped it. B had a full meltdown, so A and I went to draw in the crafting room, the basement. I decided to show A some of my more scary drawings and pulled up a picture of a werewolf I had drawn. It wasn't gory or anything, but it was scary and I didn't want to have it pulled up in case my mom saw. A and I love scary things, so we decided to make a piece together. We put on a 5-minute timer and each took turns drawing. When we were done, we had drawn a vampire biting a girl. We made it a bit scary and drew the vampire clawing at her. We printed the picture and hung it up so we could decide a color palette, but in the middle of selecting paints, we heard the door open. We had locked it, but it was one of those crappy hook locks, so all it took to open was a few shakes. B came down the stairs, and at first he didn't notice the printed paper. A told him to leave, but he ignored her and went to try and grab my mother's colored pencils. We stopped him, and while we were dragging him towards the stairs, he saw the picture hanging on the corkboard. I didn't know something so small could make a sound so loud. He screamed his lungs out and bit A's hand so that she would let him go. He bolted up the stairs, and I took A to the sink to wash her hand. We had a sink installed so we could wash paintbrushes. Within seconds, Karen was down the stairs, and I heard my mom trying to calm down B upstairs. The following is the conversation. I'm going to leave out the words she said that I can't repeat here. So if you see any weird baby talk, just know the conversation wasn't as nice as I typed it out to be. Karen:
What the heck did you do to my son?
A: We didn't do anything. Me: He came down here, so we tried to take him upstairs, and he bit A's hand. Karen:
No, what did you show him?
At this point, we didn't know that B had even seen the drawing. Me: What? We didn't show him anything. He just came down here and started screaming when we moved him. Karen:
Don't you lie to me, you little jerk. He told me he saw you drawing something horrible.
A figured out what she meant before I did. I know, I'm stupid. A: You mean the collab? It's a vampire. I looked over at the corkboard, finally catching on, and Karen ran over when she saw me looking. She ripped the paper off the tacks we had used to put it up and gave this really dramatic gasp. She put a hand over her mouth and her eyes got wide. She looked ridiculous. Karen:
Does your mother know what kind of filth you've been drawing?
I was dumbfounded, so I just answered honestly. Yeah? Karen looked even more offended and noticed my iPad on the table.
If you're going to be drawing such inappropriate filth, you don't deserve this.
This maniac picked up my tablet and was about to walk up the stairs. I snatched it away and rushed to stuff it in my pencil bag. Karen tried to grab the bag, but I pushed myself into a corner. I clutched the bag super hard and started to scream for my mom. Mom is my mother. Mom: What's wrong? You don't need to scream. She saw Karen trying to grab me and ripped her away from me. I just want to say my mom is a big lady. She towers over my dad, who is 5'10", and she's not dainty either. Karen immediately went on a tirade about how I was corrupting her son and forcing him to look at my drawings. She shoved the art into my mom's face and she just kinda raised her eyebrows at Karen. My mom then turned back to A. Mom: A, did she make your brother look at this? A: No, it was hanging up and he saw it. We had the door locked, but I guess he got in. Me: He bit A on the hand too. A showed her the bite and sent A upstairs to get a band-aid from the hall closet. My mom told Karen that she didn't appreciate her behavior and asked her to take B and leave. Karen looked upset, and I swear her face went beet red. Karen:
Are you kidding me? She scared my baby.
Mom, your son is fine. He wasn't supposed to be down here anyway. The door was locked and he must have forced it open. It was an honest mistake, and I would like you and B to please leave.
If you're going to act like this, then at least give my son the tablet. He's going to need therapy, and the tablet will help him express himself.
My mom rolled her eyes. Mom, fine. She walked over and grabbed a drawing paper tablet and handed it to Karen. Karen looked confused, then she got angry and slammed the paper onto the ground.
No, you dumb jerk. I want the one in her purse. My son needs it more than she ever will. If she's going to be drawing that cursed garbage, then she doesn't deserve it.
My mom asked what tablet I had, and I told her that Karen wanted my iPad. She looked surprised for a second, but just turned to Karen and told her to leave again. Karen was fussing and screaming, saying things about how I was disgusting and that my art was inappropriate, but my mom threatened to call the police and she just stormed up the stairs. A said she was going to stay, and Karen dragged B to the car. My mom set us down and we went over the events. We all eventually ended up laughing, and my mom put some antibiotic ointment on A's bite just to make sure it was clean. A is still here, and my mom says she can stay in the guest room for as long as she wants. Before anyone asks, my dad is on a business trip and won't be back until Friday. My mom is going to call him tomorrow and tell him what happened just in case Karen tries anything. If anything happens, I'll update. If you bothered to read this, I thank you. Edit to add. So, reading the comments, I found people debating things. The reason Karen stayed because of the rain is because the roads flood bad where I live. She wasn't here for hours because of coffee. She and my mom were talking while B was watching TV. Karen and my mom have known each other for 2 years. They weren't exactly friends, but they've chatted about stuff when me and A hang out. This was the first time they've really gotten into a deep conversation, and I'm assuming my mom was too polite to end it. Me and A were using watercolor paint to experiment with color palettes on the printed sheet of paper. I was using red as a possible clothing color, and my mom thinks it could look like blood from a quick glance. Speaking of artwork, have you ever done any artwork? And if so, what kind? Please let us know.
Watercolors for the win.
Am I the jerk for refusing to be my friend's baby's godfather? My wife is from another country, and we met a couple in which the husband's wife is from the same country. We are great friends, almost 9 years now. Done a lot together. Best friends hands down. The husband has no family alive that talks to him. The wife obviously only has the husband as her family here in the US. Well, the wife is pregnant with a baby. For sake of conversation, we will call her Jane. The husband asked me if I could be Jane's godfather. To note, they are Catholic. I was honored. My friend was thrilled, and the next day he dropped off an envelope with some papers in it. After he left, I looked and it was a legal contract that I needed to sign in order to be the godfather. Obviously, I thought it was a bit overboard, but gave it a read anyways. It has many things I must do as a godfather, such as I must go to every Catholic event in which Jane attends, such as christening, confession, confirmation, etc., which I know are normal events for a Catholic kid's life, not a big deal. Then we get into ridiculous things. I have to consider becoming Catholic. I must give a gift of at least $500 for each of these events. And on birthdays/Christmas, gifts must be cash only and over $250. Oh no, it gets worse. I'm expected to save at least $25,000 over Jane's 18 years and set it aside for Jane's future college tuition. Her parents will provide the rest. Seriously? The list goes on to include various things such as being willing to cancel any plans I have if they need me to watch Jane or if they go on vacation. Apparently, Jane can't go. Many of the other things on the list were silly or not a big deal, like spending time with her once a week. I called my friend and said it was nothing personal, but there was no way I would sign it. He got mad and said I'm the only family they have, and I should be thankful and honored to be asked. I told him I was honored, but the rules were extreme and ridiculous, especially when it comes to the money involved. He brought up that he knows I am godfather to a niece I have and that I send her money, which I do. I send her $100 a year. In my country, that's a lot of money. I told him there's a big difference between $100 and tens of thousands of dollars over 18 years. He essentially told me that he thought I was a good guy, but it was apparent I was selfish. He has since blocked my number and my email. His wife has too. Mind you, his wife and mine talked nearly every day. Since he ended things, I shredded the papers he gave me and left them in a bag and put it in his mailbox for him, telling him it was a shame he ruined our friendship over ridiculous demands. I told him I forgive him regardless. Lastly, I will note together this couple makes almost $200,000 a year. My wife and I make not even $35,000 a year. So, am I the jerk for refusing to be Jane's godfather? Added info below. I should add that while I don't know what the wife's involvement in the contract was, many people that come from her country tend to be married to, let's say, wealthier men here. So they tend to live lavish lives and spend a lot on their kids. Some tend to also look down on small gifts. For example, if you don't have a Michael Kors purse, they judge you. So maybe the money thing was the wife's idea. If someone wants to spend a ton of money, that's up to them. But I don't want to spend a ton of money on a kid that isn't even mine. At least not $25,000. Edit. Wow, this blew up over a matter of hours. I'll try to respond as much as I can. To add some more info based on some responses, I honestly thought the contract was some kind of a prank at first. As I continued reading, it became clear that it was serious. Some still ask what country our wives are from. Philippines. To be clear, not every Filipina is the same way, just as with every country and its people. Though, as stated, I don't know the wife's involvement in the contract. Shredding the papers and leaving it for the husband was probably not the best move, but it was a heat-of-the-moment thing. I'd still be the godfather if they asked, without the rules, but whether or not they will ever talk to us again is up in the air. Though I don't know if I'd want to be friends with people who flip so quickly, especially with such crazy demands. Thankfully, they don't use Reddit, so I don't have to worry about them seeing this. Well, what would you do in this situation? Would you go ahead and be their godparent and sign the paperwork or not? Please let us know.
Absolutely not. The nerve of some people.
Entitled Mom receives $7 in exchange for the respect of everyone around her. I work at a sushi restaurant. I actually do love my job. I like to joke around with customers and talk about food. Woman comes in with what I assume are her 3 kids. Everything is going well. They get the food relatively quickly and they're happy. I'm checking in every now and then, refilling drinks, etc. until the end. One of the rolls they ordered was too sour. They had already eaten half the roll. She wanted a refund. There's only one proper response in this situation. Oh, okay. And remember, you tried something and you didn't like it. These things happen. Restaurants do things differently. There have been plenty of times where I don't like the way that a restaurant has made a dish I liked, but I wasn't going to make a fuss. I don't have to eat the food, but people worked hard to make sure I got it in the first place. She does not hit me with the, oh, okay. She's complaining that she's been coming here for 20 years. The place has been open much shorter than that, and that she knows her sushi, and we did it wrong. This is all within earshot of the sushi chefs, who are really good at their job. A little biased because I work there, of course, but the sushi is really good. She keeps going. I keep saying, we can't refund it. You already ate it. I'm your waiter. This ain't up to me. She decides she's going for a smoke and then comes back. One of her kids apologized to me. Kid clearly looked embarrassed. I said not to worry and to not think poorly of your mom. The manager that day is one of my friends from college and the reason I have the job in the first place. It's been nice to have the income during lockdown. I feel terrible sending my friend over, but we both know what we're in for. She doesn't want them mistreating me either. My friend also had a rough day on Monday where I was not present with a new hire that wasn't trying to do her job and was making it harder for everybody else. She needed to blow off some steam. We had both agreed to take a shot after we finished work. Neither of us drive to work. And I felt like something was going to happen. But nothing happened. After a few more minutes of this woman being extra nasty to her, she just gave up and canceled the $7 roll and told her to keep in mind not to order it if she ever comes back. This is a $7 roll on a $130 check. The single most minor part of the meal. Everything else was $13 or more, and she had to give us a hard time. This woman failed to pick her battles. She had to take a stand, on one leg, against 2 strangers who were just following rules and making sense. You can't eat your food and then ask for a refund. I can't stop her from dying on this hill. She pays in cash, they get up to leave, and she gives me a piece of her mind. You shouldn't be so rude, etc., etc. Old Karen having to let me know. But then her kid, not the one who apologized to me earlier, looked at me and said, "Forget you." I'm walking by them and holding an empty takeout container. I throw it into the ground hard and walk away. I can't yell at a mom in front of her kids, it just doesn't feel right. I'd feel awful if that was my mom, even if my mom was in the wrong. I'm having a panic attack now, breathing heavy, tears rolling down my face. I have trouble handling words like that, even from strangers, and even when I'm definitely in the right. I'm walking around the basement for like 5 minutes, thinking it's safe to return. So I surface. My friend is heated. I think it's me at first, and I wouldn't blame her. I threw something and ran away, and I was really embarrassed about it. Face wet from tears and feeling awful. She wasn't. She was upset at the customer, and she chased her out. I feel bad that happened with the kids there, but she stood up for me, and I felt really good about it. Even though I was apologizing and very embarrassed at my behavior, my friend standing up for me when I was upset touched my heart. I've blown up at people before, everybody has, but I don't think I've gotten that kind of support before. I've just apologized for being angry even when I felt like I was right. There was a table of 4 young ladies right next to the problem table, but the other waitress took over for me because I was shaken up, crying a little, breathing heavily. This gave me angry hiccups, which just made me cry and breathe heavier. When that table left, they left a good tip. I made sure to apologize. That wasn't on the restaurant, that's on me. I shouldn't be childish and throw things no matter what. But all I heard from one of them was, "No, you were right, she was a jerk," and I felt a little better. Am I the jerk for not giving my girlfriend equity of my condo? My girlfriend and I have lived together since August of 2019 in a rental condo. My income is $320,000 a year and hers is $37,000 a year, and we split our monthly rent of $2,300 so that I pay $1,600 and she pays $700. I pay for our internet cost of $100 a month, and we have no other shared utilities since the unit has heating and water included. My girlfriend works about 30 to 35 hours per week at a job that I got her through my connections, and I work between 60 to 100 hours per week, working 2 jobs. As a side effect of this, she takes care of most of the household tasks and cooks most of our meals. She spends about 1.5 hours per day doing household chores and cooking. Now, I've recently purchased a condo with money that I pulled together during the last year or so. Sadly, lockdown keeping us at home let me save up a decent down payment. I also was able to buy a car last year to help us get around safely during lockdown. We also used that car to teach my girlfriend how to drive. The condo I bought was $970,000 and is in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in our city. And it's a 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom plus den 2-bathroom unit, an upgrade from our current rental unit that's about 750 square feet, which is a 1+ den with 2 bathrooms. The monthly cost for my new condo will be $4,350, mortgage plus maintenance fees. My girlfriend and I plan to move into my new condo on July 1st when I close. My girlfriend had insisted on paying rent in the new place since she knows the cost for me will be much higher than our current living situation. We agreed that she could pay $700 a month so that her costs don't change from our current rent. My girlfriend didn't help with the down payment and she isn't on the mortgage or the title. I had a family lawyer put together a cohabitation agreement to ensure that the condo would remain mine alone. Now, my girlfriend is saying that she thinks she deserves some equity in the property based on the rent that she would pay. It doesn't make sense to me. She pays rent now to our landlords and doesn't expect any ownership or equity, so why would I agree to give her equity in a condo that I own? Am I being the jerk here? Edit. Adding a few additional details. 1. We agreed that in 3 to 4 years, we would buy a detached home together when she had had time to save up money to contribute to the down payment, and we would jointly own that property together proportionally. 2. Our city is so expensive that she cannot buy a property on her income anywhere, not even within a 3-hour drive of the city. 3. If single, she would be paying $1,600 for rent for her own place, or $1,000 for a room somewhere normal. For $700 a month, she could only get a room in a sketchy area with multiple roommates. 4. We will likely get married in 2 to 3 years or so. 5. She chooses not to get a better job with a higher income because her current job is very relaxed. She regularly watches movies or takes naps while she is on the clock for work, and so she doesn't want to get a different job that pays more because she's concerned she will have to actually work the hours that are expected. 6. The cohabitation agreement also includes a goodwill payment clause that would give her $10,000 per year we are together to a limit of $100,000 at 10 years. This way, she would not be left with nothing if our relationship ended. Well, who do you agree with? OP or his girlfriend? Please let us know.
Please do tell us what you think. I can't wait to read your opinion.
So we're not allowed to throw snowballs in the winter? This is a story that my father is always fond of repeating, describing events that happened when he was a teen. First, a little bit of a setup. Living in Norway, especially back in the day, the winters are long, cold, and of course filled with snow. This means that most schools and other clubs, activities, etc. that deal with kids and teens have very strict rules about what one is allowed to do or not to do when it comes to said snow. Especially when it comes to snowballs, those rules tend to be very strict. Since there's a lot of snow and temperature changes, etc., there's always a lot of gravel and such used to fight the buildup of ice, etc., which can potentially make the snowballs quite dangerous projectiles, so the rules make sense, to some extent at least. My dad had become very familiar with those rules as he had been caught red-handed throwing snowballs on several occasions. This had caused him to receive an ultimatum. No more breaking the rules or you will be suspended. To make sure he knew what the rules were, he was told to study them carefully. Important to the story. Setup done. One summer, mid-June, there's a massive hailstorm. So big, in fact, that by the time it's over, the landscape looks like it's winter, with piles of sloppy, icy snow everywhere. Going outside, the adults made sure to remind the kids about the snow rules. They made a point to stop my father in the door, telling him, "You know the rules. We will keep an eye on you and expect you to follow them to the letter." Cue malicious compliance. You see, the rules were very specific. They specifically stated what you were and weren't allowed to do with snow in the winter. Every single rule started with, "In the winter, you are not allowed to." As my father had been forced to study the rules extensively, he knew perfectly well what the rules stated and went outside, gathering up a piece of snow and hurling it at one of his friends. This, of course, sparked a massive snowball fight, after which he was led up to the principal's office. Principal: "I assume you know why you're here." Father: "Not really, no. I don't see how I did anything wrong." Principal: "I thought we made things very clear when it comes to what would happen to you if you were to break the rules one more time." Pulls out the book of rules and flips to the page. Principal: "Mind reading me this rule?" Pointing to the rule about snowballs. Father: "During the winter, you are not allowed to throw snowballs." A whole bunch of text specifying what you were not allowed to throw at, where you were not allowed to throw, etc. Principal: "So, now that you've had a refresher, what do you have to say for yourself?" Father: "What time of year is it?" Principal can't think of anything to say. My father got off without any further argument, even getting a commendation from his teacher about his clever way to think outside of the box. The rules were changed to be a lot less specific about the time of year a few weeks later, though it wasn't very likely to ever happen again, as hailstorms during the summer are a very rare occurrence in this part of the country at least. I got called in for emergency at the wrong hospital. Background: I had been a doctor at a very reputed hospital in my country about 3 years back, well before lockdown. I had worked there for a year before my husband and I had decided to move to another country. I had resigned a few months before the travel to take care of the visa and all of the other stuff we would need to do before moving to another country. During this time, I would still keep getting calls from the hospital to check on this or that patient, and I would politely tell them that I don't work for them anymore. I hadn't exactly worked in the ER, but had been the first one to be called in case of any of the issues with the patients that had already been admitted in the wards, till the actual attending doctor of the patient came in. Each ward had its own duty mobile phone, and that's where the calls came from. The calls had happened very frequently, and every time I would tell the nurse who had called that I didn't work there anymore. I was very polite and nice, as I had really loved working there, and though I didn't anymore, seeing the calls reminded me of that time. As the time approached for us to fly, I stopped attending the calls, hoping they would eventually stop. It's been now 2 years after we moved, and we are now in a country with a completely different time zone. Though I have a new local number, I still keep the old number from my country active. I still occasionally see a missed call from the hospital displayed on my phone when I wake up. I can't receive the calls due to 1. Huge roaming costs, 2. The calls came mostly when I'm asleep, due to the time differences, and 3. The phone is almost always on silent. However, a few days back in the evening, I noticed there were 5 missed calls, all from the hospital. I had received them during the afternoon, which meant they were made when it was late midnight in my country. This alarmed me, as usually I only get 1 missed call. That too during the morning hours of my country. I immediately topped up the mobile and made a call to the hospital. I asked for the in-charge nurse of that particular ward. Since my number was still stored as the contact physician, the nurse who attended immediately called for the in-charge nurse and said, "Dr. OP is called." I think she was probably a junior nurse, as she also seemed a bit tense. As soon as the in-charge nurse was on call, I explained the situation to her. I told her that I had received several missed phone calls in an emergency hour, but didn't work there anymore. She was surprised and immediately apologized. I explained to her I had calls, not because it was an inconvenience to me, because it wasn't, but if they tried to reach out to a doctor who doesn't work there in cases of emergencies and expected them to come, it could cost the patient their life. I had never received 5 missed calls before and hoped that the patient for whom I was called in for was all right. She assured me that everything was okay and thanked me for letting her know. She apologized again and told me she would delete my number immediately. I thanked her and hung up. Somehow, this time I was sure I wouldn't receive any more calls. That kind of made me a bit sad in a weird way, but patients' lives matter more. I honestly hope they get it all sorted out and call the right doctor from now on. $127 dine-in dash. So I'm a server, and one of my tables walked out. This is going to be long, but please read. I need advice. Background. The servers are supposed to pay for walkouts when they happen where I work. I've had to pay for things in the past because I messed up, and I admit they were my fault. I've worked there for 2 years now, so I'm well aware of the rule. Story time. It's getting close to the end of the night, and I had to use the bathroom. Had to go number 2, which means I was going to be gone for a little. I say to 2 of my fellow servers, "I have to use the bathroom. Can you guys please watch table F1?" And they say okay. So I go to the bathroom and come back a little bit later. The assistant manager let me know I had a table. Another server got the table's drink order for me, so I'm just waiting as the assistant manager makes the drinks, and my general manager comes up to me and says F1 haven't been paid for. I notice the 2 people from the table are gone. Before I went to the bathroom, the table asked for their check, so I go to see if they left the money, but it was empty. Me. There's no money. GM. Well, you have to pay for it. Me. I don't think I should have to pay for this because I asked 2 other servers to watch my table. GM. You signed the paper, so you have to pay. You know the rules. Me. I'm sorry, but I'm not paying for it. This wasn't my fault. I walk away so I can continue to take care of my other table, then maybe 15 minutes later, I pull my assistant manager to the side. Me. Look, I follow the rules. You guys, my managers, have always said if you step out, let someone know so they can watch your table, and that's exactly what I did, so I'm not paying for it. Assistant manager. Well, that's not fair to everyone else, and you signed the paper. Me. GM said that too, and I don't know what paper you're talking about. Assistant manager. The paper that says you have to pay for walkouts regardless of the reason. It was passed out a while ago. Me. I never signed that because I was never given one. Well, it has to be paid for. It was your table at the end of the day. It's your responsibility. Me. I was having a human bodily function. How can I be held responsible when I let others know? Well, you didn't tell me. But we can't put you on the schedule until it's paid for. Me. Well, this might be the last time we work together because I'm not paying for it. In the end, my GM gave me a speech about how I've been working there for 2 years and that I'm a good employee and I should get more trustworthy people to watch my tables. Secretly, he took some of the money off the order and told me not to tell the other servers, but I still have to pay $100 overtime like a payment plan. I just want to know if I was in the wrong for not wanting to pay it. Obviously, the other 2 servers could have been held accountable as well, but I didn't want to have my coworkers hate me. At this point, I'm just going to pay it off and work until I find a new job, because this place is far from perfect, but this whole thing has completely upset me. Entitled parent tries taking my emotional support dog. I have pretty bad PTSD, and I also have a tic disorder along with anxiety, so me plus people don't work out. My dog is completely trained and is meant for panic attacks, may I add. So I'm walking through the mall with my large lab mix named Tiger. He has his vest on, which clearly states he is a service dog. He was walking in our normal position, him on my right, slightly behind so he can watch me. He doesn't mind kids, so if I'm having a good day, I will have him sit and let the kids play with him. I go to that mall quite a lot, so I see the same kids often, and I've honestly bonded with a few of the families. Enter the entitled mother. I don't remember ever talking to her, so when she walked right up to me, I was quite confused. I wasn't having a very good day, so while I was standing, doing I don't know what, Tiger was laying between me and doing slow circles because that makes me feel safe.
Excuse me, may my son pet your dog?
She says in the Karen voice. You know what I mean. I'm sorry, but he's a service dog and he's on duty, so he can't be pet right now, or something like that. I said this in my sweetest dealing with kids voice because I didn't want to seem like I was arrogant or anything. I went back to doing whatever I was doing. Tiger puts his paws on my thigh when something's wrong, and I immediately look down. The small kid, probably around 4 to 6, was petting him. Excuse me, can you tell your son not to touch my dog? I again used a polite voice.
Why? I've seen you let other kids pet your dog.
She snapped at me. I could feel the panic attack building up. I started shaking slightly, but was able to calm myself pretty fast.
Mommy, can I have the doggy?
My head snapped towards the kid, who was tugging on the leash and vest.
Of course, honey. How much for the dog?
He's not for sale. As I said, he's a service dog and is trained specifically by me for me. He was only partially trained when we adopted him, and I finished his training.
So, my son needs a service dog. He's clearly blind.
In my brain, hold up, this doesn't add up. Ma'am, if he did need one, you would have to have a dog trained specifically for him, because my dog is trained for PTSD. She huffed, grabbed her son, and walked off. I thought that was the end of it and walked to the food court. I sat with my pretzel and went through some schoolwork, I think. After a couple of minutes, I heard the same annoying Karen voice.
Okay, son, so distract that lady.
I was confused, but for some reason went back to what I was doing.
Excuse me, miss.
Yes?
What kind of doggy do you have?
Well, he's a lab. I didn't know what to say because what should I say? He's like 6. Out of nowhere, I hear Tiger yelp and immediately looked to see where he was at. And there was Karen, holding his lead with one hand and his vest with the other. He was now about 3 feet away from me, so he was clearly uncomfortable. Give me my dog. I was definitely way too calm for the situation I was in.
He's my dog. Someone called the police. This crazy lady is trying to take my service dog.
I was shaking and breathing heavy because of one of my major triggers is people yelling at me. I was seriously upset. Not only did she steal my dog from me, but she then called me crazy. Ma'am, give me my dog. Do you even know his name? I'm still shaking and somehow managed to keep a stable and firm voice.
This is my dog, Ginger.
Tiger didn't even move when he heard that. He was still standing here being handled by this nut job. I whistled because that's what I usually used to call him. Tiger, come. He pulls hard on her to get to me and dragged her to the ground. She looked like she was about to explode. He sat between me again and I grabbed his lead. See, my dog. She pulls herself up and dragged my dog back to her again, smacking my arm in the process. She hit right where one of my worst scars are, and at that point, I lost all composure. Give me my dog! I didn't care about being kind anymore. She didn't budge.
It's my dog. I'm calling the police.
Enter Tyler and Sarah, a sweet younger couple who me and my family know quite well. OP? Who is that woman holding Tiger? A psycho jerk that stole my dog. I'm shaking hard and was on the verge of tears because, you know, PTSD. Sarah walked over and worked on trying to calm me down while Tiger was dealing with Thunder Jerk. Give me the dog back before I have to do something I will regret. Fun fact, Tyler's in the army.
Don't touch me. I'll call my husband. He's a lieutenant.
Where at? Because I'm a first lieutenant. She completely stopped talking, handed over the dog, grabbed her poor son, and booked it out of here. Sadly, there's no happy ending really, but if anything changes, I'll update you. By the way, I took Tyler and Sarah out for ice cream after that incident. I no longer leave Tiger's lead laying around if I'm not holding it. Speaking of dogs, do you have a dog? And if so, what's their name? Please let us know.
We've got a teacup poodle named Karen Jr. I love her so much.
Flight attendant is told to get an in-flight movie that is interesting. This malicious compliance belongs to my beautiful wife. But since it's from many decades ago, from a time before we knew each other, we will call her Classy Flight Attendant here. First, the usual disclaimers. I'm on computer, so completely responsible for the formatting. English is my first and third language, and my mother was a school teacher, so I'm also completely responsible for my use of spelling and grammar. The setup. At the time of this event, Classy Flight Attendant is one of the top-tier flight attendants for her country's national airline. Strictly speaking, any of their flights that do not involve parts in the USA or its territories are not required to follow all FAA rules. However, whenever they fly to ports regulated by the FAA, they are expected to follow those rules to the T. Of course, it doesn't always work out that way in practice. On this occasion, Classy Flight Attendant has just landed from Europe at her home airport in South America, only to learn that she's being turned around for a round trip to New York City. She protests. By the time she lands in New York, she will be well outside FAA rest period rules with all the consequences that could follow. Her supervisors don't care. They need her on that flight right now, and away she goes. But she knows the flight to New York isn't the real problem. It's the return trip that will be pure misery. Her compatriots flying home from New York tend to be extremely entitled. They're coming from New York. That makes them somebody now. They will refuse drink service when offered, and then when the flight attendant is 3 or 4 rows further along, push the call button and order a drink. They will keep an attendant hopping back and forth the whole flight for stupid little things, many of them things they could actually do for themselves. Classy Flight Attendant is tired and knows that dealing with this entitled crowd on the return trip is going to be the worst. As they get into New York, she's told to check out an in-flight movie for the return trip. The suggestion is made to make it interesting enough to keep the passengers too busy to order the flight crew around that much. Cue the malicious compliance. As she looks over the options and finds the perfect film, it will keep the passengers riveted to their seats. Frankly, given the nature of the film, she isn't even sure why it exists in the cartridge format used on planes at this time. Perhaps because the format is also used on some yachts and cruise ships, she orders it. Once on board, she keeps it secret. She knows that once she pops it in and it starts to play, the systems in use at that time cannot be stopped. But any time before that, she could be thwarted. Mid-flight, as the plane is well out over the ocean on its way south, she pops it in. Airport 77. For those who don't know, this film is about a plane that crashed in the ocean. The results are immediate and absolute. While there are many white knuckles, no one seems inclined to press their call buttons, and Classy Flight Attendant has a very quiet, uninterrupted rest of the remainder of the flight home. The aftermath. As she is deboarding, one old lady is heard saying that she will never fly national airline again. When called on the carpet for her movie choice, Classy Flight Attendant feigns ignorance, claiming to have thought it was the much more comical Airplane and that the name was lost in translation. She is given a 3-day suspension, which is for her a much-needed rest. Oh, and she will never be allowed to pick the in-flight movie ever again. The keys are in that box. A little backstory to get you caught up. My father was a welder at a pulp and paper mill on maintenance with a union. There were around 500 people who worked here at the time, mid to late 80s. On my dad's crew, there was a man they called Squirrel because he would take anything small enough to carry and take it home. Some of the things were specialized tools made for a certain machine, and they would have to be ordered in again at the company's expense. I guess there wasn't much the mill could do because somehow the union backed him. It wasn't long before my father's tools started going missing. He knew where to look and found them in Squirrel's toolbox and some scattered on his workbench. Squirrel was an average-sized man, around 5'9" to 5'10", but my father was a huge man, standing at 6'5" and around 250 pounds, so Squirrel didn't say a word. He was too scared to. My father reported this to the union rep and the main office and was told that they will investigate. Squirrel was given a 1-week paid suspension while the investigation went on. They found many of the missing things in his locker, lunchbox, toolbox, etc. Somehow, he got the union to back him again and was allowed to come back to work at the end of his suspension. My father grabbed his mobile welder and went to Squirrel's area and welded together a giant metal box. He took everything he could identify as Squirrel's and put it in the box and welded a top on it. He said he used 5/8 stainless to make it out of. He then got the help of one of his work buddies to lift the box, and Dad welded it to the bathroom of the I-beam on the ceiling, about 20 feet in the air. The day Squirrel came back, he was looking for all of his things, but couldn't find it at all. He asked everyone he could, but no one said a word, except, "I take care of my tools. Maybe you should take better care of yours." This went on for a couple of hours, until Squirrel went into the main office to complain, saying someone stole everything of his. The shop steward and Squirrel walked into the maintenance shop to ask the people in there where his things were. Dad stood up and walked up close, and knowing him, he was towering over Squirrel, and said something along the lines of, "Squirrels like to climb to store their stuff. Are you sure you didn't climb the I-beam and put your stuff up there?" I guess the look of, "Oh no," on the shop steward's face was almost too good, but the look of pure horror on Squirrel's face was my dad's favorite part of this story. He would laugh just as hard at every telling when he got to this part. Squirrel went into his work area and looked up. He saw the box up there. He tried to get anyone's help to get it down, but everyone seemed to have important things to do and can't at the moment. Squirrel took a day and a half working alone to get his things from the box and to remove the box from where it was welded. My father said not a thing ever went missing again, and Squirrel worked there another 10 years or more until the mill was shut down. I can say I believe him, because one night, staying at his place, I got drunk and was thinking about going home. He went to the basement and made a little box and welded my keys in it. I got them back the next day. I miss my father and his stories. I hope this qualifies as pro. Have you ever had someone take things that belong to you? If so, what did you do about it? Please let us know.
You take my sanity by making me listen to these stories all day.
Am I the jerk for leaving a family gathering and insisting mother-in-law apologize over M&Ms? My wife, 34 female, and I, 31 female, have two wonderful kids who are both 4, they're twins. They were conceived with my wife's eggs and a known donor, and I carried/birthed them. Both kids ended up being practical clones of my wife, so it's pretty clear to everyone who contributed the genetic material. My in-laws had everyone together at their house earlier this month. We've all had our shots, and the weather was so nice that we had a barbecue. My kids were playing outside with their cousins, and sister-in-law and mother-in-law and I were chatting in the kitchen. At one point, my two run inside from playing and ask if they can have some M&Ms that they see on the counter. I tell them, no, we'll be eating in 15 minutes. You can have some after dinner. They run back out, and mother-in-law excuses herself to go outside. A little bit later, sister-in-law and I get the call that the food is ready, so we go outside, and I see my kids each have a little cup full of M&Ms that they are eating. I tell my kids that they knew they were not supposed to be eating those, and I took away the cups. Mother-in-law comes over and says that she gave them the M&Ms and that they can have them. To which I replied, "No, they can't. It's dinner time. You were there when I told them no." Mother-in-law says again that
They can have some chocolate. It's fine.
and tries to take the cups out of my hands. We go back and forth with no, yes, no for a minute, prompting wife to start walking over to us, just in time to hear mother-in-law say in front of my kids,
I'm saying it's okay. They aren't even your kids. They're your wives. Just give them the chocolate.
Wife had mother-in-law repeat herself and said something like, "Absolutely not. We're leaving." I put the M&Ms on the nearest table, grabbed both my kids, who were now softly crying, and started to pack our stuff. The whole event erupted into chaos. Father-in-law screaming about the disrespect of us leaving, grandmother crying, brother-in-law and sister-in-law arguing with father-in-law, mother-in-law crying that her only daughter is abandoning her. It was a mess. After a couple hours at home, the kids seemed okay, but mother-in-law saying I'm not their mom really scared them. Wife spent about 4 hours on rotating phone calls with all of her family, from father-in-law screaming at her, mother-in-law crying over how we took her grandkids away over M&Ms and made her out to be the bad grandma, brother-in-law trying to get in the drama, grandmother depressed, saying she would pass without seeing her great-grandkids again. Wife's message to all of them was that mother-in-law needed to apologize to me and to our kids for what she said. We made it clear that we would have no problem spending time with grandmother or brother-in-law's family, but we would not bring the kids around mother-in-law until she apologized. As you can guess, the apology has not happened, but the phone calls of guilt trips, yelling, and crying have not let up. I feel an apology is not even a big deal. and at this point, mother-in-law is making the choice not to see her grandkids. I want to hold firm, but I know how hard this all is on my wife, even if I really don't think it's my fault. Am I the jerk for insisting on an apology? Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or mother-in-law? Please let us know.
If mother-in-law has the nerve to say something like that, then the babies don't need to be around her in the first place.
2 months in the customer service job, and it finally happened. I work for the company that employs electricians for small jobs. Part of my job is to answer the phone, take their information, type a quick summary of the job, and then open the work order for the electrician, which they will then use to contact the client and do the requested work. So the municipal elections are happening, and it is Friday afternoon. Suddenly, I get a call from a new client who tells me that the light fixture at the polling place nearby has a light fixture that is not working. The light that is not working is located right above the booth. After getting all the basic information, the call starts pretty much like they all do. The people are not able to see the numbers they are writing on the tickets. Can you send an electrician to fix the lighting? She says in a flustered tone. Sure, ma'am. Since this seems to be urgent, I can give you the information of the electrician who is currently nearby working another job. There's also another electrician who is currently here at the office. I can ask if they're free to take a work order right now. At this point, I'm interrupted.
Yes, this is very urgent. Go and talk to the one who is there right now.
We are located about 15 minutes away from the polling location, so this might be faster, considering that the electrician who is currently on the job can't really just leave to do another job. So I take the phone with me and head towards the break area to talk to the other electrician. After walking around the warehouse, I find the electrician talking on his phone, most likely with another client. I do some gesturing to him, asking if he's free after this call. When I get the answer, I update the lady who is on the phone with me. The electrician is speaking to another client right now, but as soon as he finishes his call, he can call you, and at this point, I'm interrupted again.
Just take his phone and tell him this is an emergency. The election is surely more important.
There is, and I'm being serious here, a 10-second silence as I'm feeling confused. After collecting my thoughts and realizing that she's being serious, I finally answer, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm cut short yet again. At this point, her talking gets so fast and even more confusing. There's a lot of talking about how I would not want our company to end up on the local newspaper. She actually mentioned some bigger ones too, but oh well, for not offering the proper service and thus ruining the election. After more silence and awkward answers, I finally give her the information of the electrician who is working nearby, with the promise of also following through with the one who is currently on the phone. She also asks for contact info of my supervisor, which I also give her, because I have to. So the phone call ends and the electrician comes over to the office after finishing his call. I give him the summary of the job, and as I'm doing that, the electrician who is with me gets a call from my supervisor. He collects his equipment and leaves to do the work order at the polling place. After an hour or so, he returns from his job and I ask him how it went. Apparently, the lady had contacted pretty much every company in the area that offers the electrician services. So when our electrician arrived at the venue, there were a total of 6 guys from different companies already running around fixing a single light fixture. In the end, the light bulb was not screwed in tightly enough. The janitor of the venue had changed all of the light bulbs before the booths opened, leaving that single light bulb loose. What I heard is that the woman had threatened multiple local companies at the site about their slow response and unprofessional behavior. I know that the municipal elections are a big deal, but I have never before thought that the organizers are under so much stress that they would act like this. I guess it was just a matter of time before I encountered a customer like this. But the scale of this. Wow. Edit. I did drop by the guy who writes our invoices as I was leaving for the day. All the companies will, most likely, charge all their working hours rounded up because of all the time they wasted. What surprised me though was that the organizers told everyone at the site to direct their invoices to the venue owner. Apparently, it was his fault for not following through with the preparations properly. Whether he is the one who has to pay for this fiasco, or if he then forwards it to the organizers after, is something we will probably never find out. Not putting in enough hours, you say? A few years ago, I worked as a field engineer for a call recording company. I worked primarily with 911 agencies and would integrate recording systems with radio and phone systems to record the calls and radio traffic. If you've heard a 911 call on the news from one of a few states along the East Coast, there's a good chance I built and installed that system. As part of our company's policy, We would do preventative maintenance every 6 months. This was where we went on site, tested everything was functioning properly, and showed some value in our maintenance contracts through FaceTime with the customers. After some years, I had climbed the ladder to being the lead engineer, installer, and trainer. I trained most of the other engineers and techs within the company along with performing my normal duties. I had also installed the vast majority of the systems I was doing maintenance on and was extremely familiar with them. A maintenance visit took me around an hour, where it took the new guys 4 to 5 hours, and I would usually knock out 2 to 3 maintenance visits in a single day. I had literally triple the numbers as the next closest tech. As often happens, eventually the company was bought out. The new owner came in and presented himself as very metrics focused. The problem was that he didn't understand what we did in the field, so his metrics weren't always good ones. Eventually, I got written up and put on a performance improvement plan. The reason? Days I didn't have to drive far, I would finish 3 maintenance visits and still be home in less than 6 hours. Again, my actual performance metrics were legitimately triple the next closest tech, and most days I worked well over 8 hours when driving was included. But instead of looking at those metrics, he used time as his only metric and focused solely on the shortest days. And unfortunately for me, I objectively worked less time than anyone else. Now for the malicious compliance. Instead of scheduling the way I had previously, I started scheduling to ensure I hit 8 hours a day every day. Previously, I had started at a customer site at 9 a.m., whether it was 1 hour away or 5, so would get up at whatever time that day required. I would also try to knock out multiple customers in the same area on the same trip to save driving time on longer days. Some days I would drive 12 hours total, knock out 3 maintenance visits, taking another few hours, and have a total day of 15 plus hours. Afterwards, I left for sites at exactly 8 a.m. and tried to get home at exactly 5 p.m. For those sites that were 5 hours away, can't do them without a hotel room. Instead of costing a full tank of gas and a single day's wages for 3 clients, it now cost the company the same amount of gas, 3 to 4 nights in a hotel, and multiple days of my salary. For closer sites that I didn't need a hotel, I would make sure I didn't leave too soon to get home at exactly 5 p.m., so would sit in a server room playing games on my phone for a few hours. If sites were close enough, I would still try to knock out 2 or sometimes 3, but if time was the metric, I was going to make sure I worked as closely to 8 to 5 as possible without doing anything detrimental to a customer. Overall, I was trying to make a point to show that while I may have been meeting the time metric, I was actually doing less work by meeting that metric. We did employee reviews every quarter, so when my next review came around 3 months later, I tried to bring it up. Instead, the new owner praised me for working harder and ignored that I was doing significantly less work. During that meeting, I tried showing that it was costing the company more, and I was achieving less by meeting that metric instead of an actual performance metric. But somehow, despite my spreadsheets showing costs, site visits, completed maintenance, and everything else, he refused to understand it. He kept praising how my work ethic had improved and didn't want me to change anything or go back. So I didn't change a thing and coasted at that job for the next few years. I don't work here, and neither does my bag. For those who aren't aware, Aldi is a chain of mid-sized grocery stores. They rebranded themselves a few years ago as a sort of middle ground between a standard grocer and Whole Foods, with options healthier than, say, Walmart, but not full-on super health craze like Whole Foods. But one of the defining characteristics of Aldi is that you pay for your cart. There's a device that locks up all the carts together, so when you need one, you insert a quarter into the device, decoupling it from the next cart. When you finish shopping, you return the cart to the line and recouple it, at which point you can then remove your quarter. However, Aldi does not offer a similar function for anything else. Not hand-carried baskets, and definitely not for bags. This is where our story begins. I do most of my grocery shopping at Walmart, but I do hit the Aldi nearby for a few small things. Usually, I don't need to bother with a cart due to the low volume. Instead, I bring in my own foil-lined insulated bag. I have the bags because I live out in the country, so when I get takeout or buy cold stuff at the store, the stuff is still hot or cold respectively by the time I get home 15 minutes later. When I go to Aldi, I just bring the insulated bag in with me, put items into it while I shop, tell the cashier how many of each item I have so I don't even need to unload them, and easy peasy, no carts required. As I left the store, had just removed my mask as I passed through the doors, A few weeks ago, our dear Karen saw me with the bag in hand. I hadn't zipped it up yet, as I was still messing with the mask and had some fridge cold stuff from Walmart I was going to put into the bag in the truck before I started home. Karen must have seen that it had the foil insulation with purchased items, and this is what ensued. Karen,
Hey, you!
snapping her fingers. Why do they always snap?
You!
I turned to face her. Yes? Karen,
Give me that when you're done.
points at my bag. Me, ma'am, these are my groceries. I won't be done with them until I eat them in the coming weeks.
I know that. What do I look like? A moron?
Well,
I mean the bag, idiot.
me, ma'am, this bag is also mine.
Yeah, it's yours now, but when you bring it back to get your coin, then I want it.
Me, again, this is my bag, not the store's. Aldi doesn't have bags. They only do the quarter thing for the carts.
BS. They have bags at the checkout. I can see them from here.
Yeah, those are for sale, not temporary use. And this bag isn't from Aldi. I got it on Amazon.
Whatever. You should still bring it to me. I only need it for a few minutes, and I don't have a quarter for the carts anyway.
Oh, so we're in one of those situations. Gotcha. I'm in my current military job. I'm an instructor, and one of the skills we master during this assignment is the art of staring in silence with a completely blank look on our face. It's a great tool to force students to engage in discussion, embracing the silence until one of them gets so uncomfortable that they start talking about anything just to break the silence. We also use continuous questions to challenge students to delve deeper into topics, like lots of why and how questions that force them to come to their own conclusions. Me, stares in silence. Karen, after almost 10 seconds.
Well?
Me, well what? Karen,
What are you waiting for? Go unload your groceries and bring me that bag.
she was approaching shrill by the end of that sentence. Me, why would I do that?
Because I need that bag to shop.
Why is that my problem?
What are you talking about?
Why is your lack of bags or coins something I need to help you with? Karen, visibly struggling with the effort of thinking.
Because.
Her head cocks to the side a bit, then she rallies back into indignation mode.
Ugh. Just get out of my face, you little jerk.
Me, weren't you the one who stopped me to demand I give you my personal property? Karen, devolving into guttural utterances that barely resembled a spoken language. Me, still hiding behind my stoic instructor face. Karen,
You people are what's wrong with this country.
she stormed off into the store without a cart. Me, have a wonderful day, as I wave at her. Oh, the joys of malicious passivity. Am I the jerk for not responding to employers' emails outside of working hours? I have just started working for a huge organization. It's set on 40 acres of land and employs roughly 1,000 members of staff. It's not a theme park, but it is an attraction. I have not long graduated university and will be going back to study my master's in September. This is a temporary, minimum wage, general dog's body customer service type role. The contract runs out at the end of August. I thought this is an excellent opportunity to earn a bit of money between studying. One of the things I've noticed, though, is that they constantly send out emails. Between 6 to 10 emails a day, every day. Some are just news bulletins, others are blog posts and updates from the directors and other various departments, etc. However, some of them are important and require a response, such as acknowledging changes to policies and procedures, and due to the nature and size of the organization, this appears to happen a lot. The emails contain documents comprised of pages and pages of information that needs to be acknowledged, understood, signed, and returned. Before I begin explaining the issue, I feel I must inform you that due to the size of the organization, staff are authorized to have their mobile phones on our person during our shifts. So anyway, having returned to work after a couple of days off, I was collared by one of the supervisors who asked why I haven't been responding to emails recently, as they've sent out several important emails, including follow-ups. I responded that I've been off for a few days and was just about to read through them now and take action accordingly. They then proceeded to tell me in a rather condescending tone that the emails can be actioned in our free time outside of work. I respectfully said, but that's my free time. They were then pretty adamant that it's too much reading, etc. to be done during our working hours when I'm employed to work. I was like, no offense, but I've been employed on minimum wage and am not a salaried member of the team who is reasonably expected to spend so much time conducting work tasks outside of work. It's now become a whole issue, and I'm being made to feel like I am not a team player. I can't help but feel like I'm not being unreasonable. So, am I the jerk? Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or their supervisor? Please let us know.
You want me to be a team player? You better pay me like a team player.
Karen tells me I need to stop mowing my lawn. To set the scene, I live in a relatively quiet neighborhood, and all of our neighbors take great pride in keeping their lawns and the appearance of their houses. So it's common to hear lawnmowers, weed whackers, saws, etc. On Saturday afternoon, I decided that I would mow our front and back lawns for my parents as they were preparing dinner, and I thought it would be a nice thing to do. I had already finished mowing our backyard, which took about 15 to 20 minutes, and had moved on to our front yard. When I walked into the front yard, I did notice my elderly neighbor, she's like 97, sitting outside with her daughter. While in the middle of mowing the front lawn, the daughter comes up to me and said something. I couldn't hear her because the mower was running, so I turned it off and asked her to repeat herself. She then says,
I don't know if you noticed, young lady, but we are trying to sit and enjoy our Saturday afternoon, and you are disrupting us with your mowing.
I apologized, and I thought that was the end of the ordeal, so I started the mower back up. The daughter starts yelling at me that I have zero respect for the elderly or my neighbors. I told her I would be done in 10 minutes, but she just wanted me to stop and come back and finish in 2 hours. 2 hours. I once again told her that I would finish mowing now, as I only had half of the lawn left, and she blew up once again. I then told her, me mowing for another 10 minutes will not hurt, and you can go back inside or just wait for me to be done. I never complain when you mow yours at 7 in the morning. Now please, get off of our lawn. I thought I was polite, but when I told my parents about it, they yelled and are upset because now they think that the neighbors will talk poorly about me and our family. I do kind of feel bad now because I could have just waited to do it another time, and I may have taken it too far with telling her to get off our lawn. So, am I the jerk for continuing to mow against the wishes of an elderly neighbor? Edit. I just looked up my city laws, and unfortunately, it is legal for her to mow at 7 a.m. Well, what would you do in this situation? Would you stop mowing or keep mowing? Please let us know.
I'd mow a little bit slower is what I would do.
Karen demands I move 2 cars impounded by the police. This story is from roughly 2013. I was an adjuster for Lizard Insurance and would go to many tow lots after car accidents and decide if a car was a total loss or send it to a body shop, as well as do the initial write-up of an estimate on repair costs. The tow lot I was at this day also worked with the state police and housed their overflow storage for anything deemed evidence and on hold from release. These vehicles were kept behind a locked gate inside the already fenced, gated tow yard. I was there to do an appraisal on 2 vehicles that had been involved in a minor accident. However, both were left unable to drive from the scene due to either multiple flats, lights knocked out, or windows busted. I finished the first vehicle, and I've started taking photos of the second vehicle. I have headphones in, and I'm listening to the album Cavalcade by the Flatliners. Anywho, I see a woman I'd guessed was around 50 walk up to the police evidence lot, and the gate swings open out of the corner of my eye. Not paying much attention, as the vehicles I was working with were on the same side of the lot, but about 50 meters down from the evidence lot. As my back is turned to this woman, I will hereon refer to as Karen, I take the last couple of photos I need, the last being a photograph of the VIN of the vehicle, which is located where the windshield meets the hood, almost on the dash through the windscreen. I hope this makes sense. Karen, out of literally nowhere, grabs both cables to my headphones from behind and rips them out of my ears. Karen,
Excuse me? Why are there 2 cars in front of mine so I cannot get it out?
This lot would stack cars in 4 or 5 deep, side by side, and move them around with a small truck to release them. Me, please don't touch me, and I don't think you should be in there, and I don't.
You shouldn't be listening to music on the job anyway, or slacking off taking pictures of other people's belongings. You're probably back here stealing.
I attempt to point at the Lizard Insurance logo on my blue jacket, but Karen continues on.
Are you going to do your job? Or do I need to call the police because you're refusing to give me my property?
Me, Have you gone into the office at ABC Towing?
No, I saw you here, and you need to move these cars so I can get mine and leave.
As Karen opens the door and gets into the first car in the ones blocking her. Me. Hey, no! You can't go in there. That's police evidence. I use my cell phone to call ABC Towing and inform them. Karen.
If you won't move these cars, then I will. Where are the keys?
Me. In the office with the employees. At this time, the manager comes running out with one of those weird smartphone/Nextel style phones in his hand. Manager. Hey lady, get the heck out of those cars. They're property of the state police. Manager frantically uses his Nextel to talk to someone. Manager sees the chain used to keep the lot closed has been cut with bolt cutters. Karen was carrying a pair of bolt cutters and had thrown them into her car when she was back at it. Manager and Karen argue back and forth. I intently listen and pay half attention as I finish my duties for work. About 8 to 10 minutes pass and 7 police cars come flying back into the lot. Manager greets the police and explains what's going on, but not after Karen attempts to scream at the police that I had stolen her car from her. Police tell Karen to stand over in a direction he points, sending one officer to wait for her. Turns out the lieutenant was on scene who was in charge of the county's police tow licenses. After getting manager's story, lieutenant comes to me and takes mine. While I'm informing him of what's happened, Karen overhears and starts yelling and attempting to approach me. The officer standing with her grabbed her by her arm. Karen yanked that arm out of the female officer's hand and shoved her. Surprisingly, knocks the officer down. Karen is screaming incoherently as she charges towards me. The lieutenant steps in front of me and with his taser gets her with the most beautiful sound in the world. Karen falls down and skids slightly. They immediately handcuff her. Turns out, Karen had walked onto the lot carrying the bolt cutters while I was in the office talking with staff about the 2 cars I needed to adjust. She had been roaming the lot until she saw me and I happened to be near her car. Karen was charged with too many things to name. I know Karen did jail time, but I'm not sure how long. Years later, the tow company I now own impounded her car for being double parked. She remembered who I was and quietly paid. I know it's your number, but quite some time ago, my girlfriend and I, now my wife of more than 15 years, moved in together and had to set up all of the things, cable, internet, phone, etc. We got our home phone number, our 2 cell phones, and we were off to the races. Almost immediately, we start getting calls for an establishment that does custom framing and various other art-related things. Let's call them Expo for Art. Of course, we had caller ID, and we had friends that would call us, but inevitably, if we didn't recognize the number, it was someone wanting to find out if their order was complete, or their frame was done, or what their hours were, or any of 1,000 other questions. I'm sure anyone else who had this happen will recognize this exchange. Sorry, that's no longer their number. This is a residence. Yes, I'm sure. No, I'm not giving you my address. No, I don't know their new number. Yes, I have a phone book, but so do you. Eventually, after 1,000 of these, and changing the messages on our answering machine to say, this is not, and I repeat, this is not Expo for Art. If you are trying to reach Expo for Art, please hang up, look up their number, and try that, because we aren't them. Eventually, I got my gazillionth call, and I asked the person on the other end of the line where they keep getting this number. Well, it's printed on my receipt. I guess I'll just call this other number. Any chance you can give me that number? Thanks. I call it. Hello, Expo for Art. You guys are still giving out my home phone number on your receipts. Yeah, so? Well, stop it. It's been at least a year since you haven't had that number. At least cross it out or something. That's a pain. I'm not making my employees do that. So, you're the manager? I'm the owner. So let me see if I have this right. You, what was your name again? Let's call him Fred. You, Fred, have decided that it's too inconvenient to cross my home phone number off of your receipts. So you're just going to keep giving it out? Yup. What are you gonna do? Sue me? Maybe. Whatever, I've got stuff to do. Bye. I called a lawyer. Didn't really have a leg to stand on. I went to the store and asked for Fred. Fred's not here. He's hardly ever here, really. You want me to call him? No, I'm fine. I know this is going to sound odd, but is there any chance I can see one of your receipts? She picks up a receipt book and shows it to me. Sure enough, it's got my phone number at the top above another one. I say, I thought so. I couldn't get you at the other number. Some guy yelled at me and I don't have my old receipt, so I had to come down here. We've been having that happen a lot. Ever since Fred decided we didn't need 2 phone lines. But he had just bought like 20 boxes of these other receipt books and business cards, and he's too cheap to buy more until they run out. I'd hate to be that guy. Yeah, that's gotta suck. So I went home and hatched my evil plan. Next phone number I didn't recognize. Hello, Expo for Art. Hi, this is Mary Smith. I dropped off a thing last week to be framed. Is it ready? Let me check. Yep, we finished it this morning. I hope you don't mind, but we decided to upgrade the matting because of the weight of the price. It's the same color and won't be charging you for it since it was my decision. Oh, thank you. I'll be down to pick it up later today. What time do you close? I looked down at the business card with my number and the hours clearly marked 11 to 4. Take your time. We'll be here until 7. Thank you so much. Can you tell me how much that was? $19.99, ma'am, plus tax, so $21.39. Wow, that's cheap. Are you sure? Of course. If anyone has a problem, tell them you talked to Fred. Okay, see you around 6. See you then. Thank you for calling Expo for Art. For weeks, I kept giving out completely random information. How much is a 36 by 48 matted frame? Let's say $24.99. Wow, that's cheap. How much to have it done custom how they want it? Custom is an extra $10, so $34.99. Wow, that's cheap. I'll be right down. What was your name? Fred. See you in 10, Fred. How much to have the entire front page of the New York Times mounted and framed? $33.99, unless you want our special proprietary newspaper frame and mat service. Only $49.99 and guaranteed for life. Only at Expo for Art. Tell them Fred sent you. I can only imagine the number of upset people who showed up to pick up orders that weren't ready, and when they finally were given a price way higher than what Fred had told them over the phone. Eventually, someone let slip up that they called the number on the receipt, and that's what Fred had told them. Fred was not happy. Hello, thank you for calling Expo for Art. This is Fred. You're not Fred, I'm Fred. Are you trying to put me out of business? Why, Fred? Whatever do you mean? Someone has been giving prices to my customers and telling them their orders are in when they're not due for weeks. Well, Fred, who called them? Nobody called them. They called us. Then that's your problem. If someone called you and got pricing information, that would seem to be your problem. They didn't call me. They called you. Well, how would that happen? Your number is on my receipts and business cards. My. It seems to me that there's a very simple solution here. Take my number off of your receipts and business cards. Do you have any idea how much promotional material costs? Is it more than it costs to do these jobs for the prices you're quoting? Is it more than it costs to lose customers? Or less than that? This is extortion. Call it what you want, Fred. The choices and consequences are entirely up to you. A week later. Hello, Expo for Art. This is Fred. I've ordered new receipt books and cards. Can you please stop doing this? Sure. Bye, Fred. What would you do if you were in this situation? Would you get your own form of revenge or not? Please let us know. Oh, I'd get revenge all right. $10 and a pencil. A few years ago, after changing jobs, I found myself in a new office with a new phone number. After some orientation, training, and other new hire stuff, I finally get to sit down and do the things. I get my voicemail and answering machine set up the email, and the phone rings. Good morning, Railroad Engineering. Yeah, when can I take the GED test? Sorry, wrong number. Click. Rings again. Seriously, when can I take the GED test? Like I said, wrong number. Bye. This went on for weeks, 15 to 20 calls a day. Some people screaming at me for not being the Adult Learning Center. One day, an epiphany. This isn't the Adult Learning Center? Nope. Do you know the number? Check Google. I did. This is the number on their website. Oh, really? A little Google foo of my own, and I dig up a few numbers and give them a call. They tell me that they don't maintain their website, and there's nothing they can do about it, and it's not their problem. I'm just going to have to deal with it. My favorite line of that conversation was, "What are you going to do about it? I work for the state. You can't do anything. Bye-bye. And you can imagine that bye-bye just dripped with the condensation that only a hubris and decades of Karenhood can muster. Oh no, let's dance. The next day. Good morning, this is Railroad. When can I take the GED test? We give that on request. It takes about an hour and a half. Come on down. Oh, awesome. How much is it? $10. Bring a pencil. We'll sharpen yours, but we can't supply them. Budget cuts, you know? Nah, I get it. See you in a bit. Take your time. They don't like me telling you this, but if you get here before we close, they have to give you the test. See you when you get here. Thanks, man. See you later. Now, for those of you who don't know, the GED test takes a whole day. It also usually costs upward of $100, depending on the state. In the state I was living and working at the time, it was around $200. As such, it was only offered at certain intervals. So, as I was telling dozens of people per day that it was $10, took 90 minutes, and offered on request, I'm sure that they were absolutely inundated with angry people with freshly sharpened number 2 pencils, waving their $10 bills and demanding the test that the guy on the phone told them they could come and take. Every morning I checked the website to see if my phone number was still on there. I also took the liberty of crawling around and getting the phone numbers for some managers. I was happy to hand these out when people called back to complain that they hadn't been allowed to take the test. Head back down there and ask to speak to random director and tell them that they called the number on the website and this is what they were told. It took them about 6 more weeks to change the website. For some reason, all of the managers' numbers disappeared from the website as well. Entitled Lady Always Gets Rotten Salads. This story belongs to my beautiful wife, who is a deli manager in a major regional grocery store in our area. She runs a tight ship and likes to keep things clean and up to date. So imagine her surprise when a customer, let's call her the Entitled Lady, reports that 8 out of 8 boxed salads, think macaroni salad, potato salad, that sort of thing, she had just bought were all bad. Entitled Lady:
I just bought these 8 salads, and every single one of them was spoiled and inedible.
Beautiful wife: I'm sorry to hear that. It surprises me. Do you have them with you? I'll be happy to exchange them.
No, I threw them away, but I have the receipt.
Wife looks over the receipt. It is recent, like a day or two old, and all in order. Against her better judgment, she errs on the side of good customer service and replaces the 8 salads just on the basis of the receipt. That was Monday. Come Wednesday, beautiful wife is working on the fryer when she hears a familiar voice telling one of the team,
I just bought these 8 salads, and every single one of them was spoiled and inedible.
Beautiful wife steps forward and says, I've got this. And the Entitled Lady does not look pleased to see my wife again. So, still all bad? Did you bring the salads back with you to exchange?
No, they're too disgusting. I threw them all away, but I have the receipt.
Wife: the trouble with that is that I can't send your receipt back to my vendor for credit on the bad salads. I need the salads to do the exchange.
You didn't need them last time.
Actually, I did, but I took you at face value and ate it that time. This is not something I'm inclined to do again.
Karen, starting to rise like a cobra ready to strike. How dare you address me like that? Don't you know how good a customer I am to this store? I want to talk to the manager.
Well, sweetie, that would be me. No spoiled salad to exchange, no exchange. At that, Entitled Lady storms off in a huff. Beautiful wife checks with the rest of the team. It becomes clear that at least twice in the last week, the Entitled Lady had hit the deli during their busiest times and gotten new salads without having brought back the purportedly bad ones. That's at least 24 free salads over the last couple weeks. Right about then, busy store director comes storming over with the Entitled Lady in tow. What's this I hear about you insulting our customers, beautiful wife? Wife: what did she tell you, busy store director? How I refuse to exchange a product that she doesn't have? Or that over the last 2 weeks, she is the only person to complain about any of our salads being bad, and oddly enough, every single one she got from here was bad. Or that we already gave her dozens of free salads, and that is more than enough generosity for one deli. I'm not saying she's scamming us, sir, but if she doesn't bring the spoiled salad back with her to exchange, there will be no more exchanges. Busy store director: I see. As you were. Then to the Entitled Lady: you're lucky I don't ban you from the store for this behavior. The entitled lady realizes she won't get any further today and sulks away. Beautiful wife makes sure to train everyone on her team to require the old product be returned for any exchanges. A couple of days later, she's coming out of the cooler when she hears a familiar voice.
I bought these 8 salads the other day, and every single one of them was bad.
It's a different worker who wasn't there last time. Different worker. Did you bring them back with you to exchange?
No, they were gross. I threw them all away.
I can't exchange them unless you bring them back. Beautiful wife smiles.
Not even just this once? It's an honest mistake.
Beautiful wife steps out into full view. Not even just this 10th time. Now get out of my deli and don't ever come back. The entitled lady fled and was never seen in those parts again. Never have I ever had an issue with a neighbor until this guy. I, 40 male, have never had an issue with a neighbor. I've been lucky up until now. I moved into a new home at the end of February 2020. I introduced myself and my family to the new neighbors. Like usual, some were more receptive and friendly than others. Within 30 days of buying the home and moving in, one of my next door neighbors started construction on a large concrete block building that is really close to the property line, as well as really close to his back porch and another building in his backyard. I went to speak with him. He indeed told me that it was not permitted and agreed that it was probably too close to the property line. He said he had stopped construction on it, but didn't know why I had such a big deal with it, as it's just a shed. As soon as I mentioned construction and fire codes, he walks off and stated again he had stopped construction on it. 2 days later, he continues construction. I tried to talk to him again, and he just says, "Whatever, buddy," and walks off. So I checked with the city, and the zoning in our area requires a 12-foot setback for any structure, more depending on the height. This was less than 4 feet from the common wall between our yards. That wall is the property line. So I call the city. While describing my complaint, the operator pulls up recent aerial photographs of his property. She says that he has no permits on file with the city for any of the 3 other buildings in his backyard, the porch added to his home, the wall around his property, the structure he built in his front yard, etc. She also says that he has very obviously overbuilt his property and there are guidelines to what percentage of his property he can fill with buildings. The guy has a lot of unpermitted, uninspected buildings and construction on his property. The city went out and gave him a notice of violation for work without permits. He has been asked by the city multiple times for information on his property and has not replied. That was April 2020 when he got the notice of violation. He has a couple of dogs. When I first met him, he told me to come meet his dogs so that they won't bark at me too much. I did, and it didn't seem like the dogs were barking that much. After he got the violation notice from the city, he would just leave his dogs outside for hours on end and let them bark and bark the whole time. It's just about mind-numbing. The way his yard is set up, he has a driveway on one side that goes from the street out front to his backyard. The other side of his house borders mine, and that is where the dogs are most of the time. It seriously sounds like they're right outside. With the TV and home theater on, AC running, kids making noise, and all of the other household noises, I can still hear his dogs barking. 5 a.m. to 11 p.m., those dogs will bark. Lately, he started keeping one dog at a time on his back porch, but is confining them to some kind of kennel. It's only about 4 by 6 feet. The dogs will whine, yip, and bark for hours on end, and it's right on the other side of the wall from me. I feel bad for the poor dog, being confined for hours at a time. Summer temperatures are now getting over 100 degrees and can even get up to 115 during the summer. So, I go over to talk to him about his dogs and their barking. This was December 2020. He has a large block wall surrounding his front yard. It's about 7 or 8 feet tall. There's no way to access his front yard or his yard without going through a gate, which has barking/snarling dogs on the other side. No doorbell, intercom, nothing. So I knock on the side of his house that's facing the street. I'm standing in his driveway. Both him and his wife come out. I asked him if he could do something about his dogs and their constant barking. He said to me, with a smirk on his face, that he doesn't know what I'm talking about and that his dogs never bark. This whole time, his dogs are barking so much that we can barely hear each other. "You know what, buddy? You already cost me way too much money. Get off my property," he then says to me. I take 2 steps and I'm now on a city-owned sidewalk and near the street. His wife climbs on something from his front yard and is screaming at me from inside the yard, leaning over their wall. He comes out of his gate and takes his shirt off, trying to get me to fight him in the street. I just walked home. I didn't laugh, argue, yell, talk, or anything. At that point, I just walked home to avoid the confrontation that they were wanting. His dogs have continued to bark almost all day, every day since that interaction. I was contacted by a city inspector recently about the complaint. The inspector told me that they've been asking him for information for over a year and he has yet to comply, so his notice of violation has officially been turned into a citation and he will have to go before a judge. The problem that the inspector has had is that he has been unable to make contact with my neighbor as he cannot get to the front door. He said that he has to issue the citation in person and also has to take pictures of the property when he serves the individual. The city inspector said that he is most likely going to have to get a police officer to escort him onto the property. I've been debating calling the city about the animal noise. If I do, I'll probably bring up the issue of the confined dog on the back porch. They handle animal noise separately than normal noise and disturbing the peace calls. He'll get fined between $50 and $500 per occurrence, as I'll be required to complete a log of when I hear the dogs. He has clearly shown that he is unable to have a conversation about it and resolve it between the two of us. I know he's in trouble with the city already, but does he seriously think he can just continue to be a jerk without any repercussions? Like I've said, I'm 40. I've had plenty of neighbors through the years and have never had any issue with any of them until this guy. He's in big trouble already, but I feel like it might be too much under the circumstances, but I'd also like to be able to get a full night's sleep without having to listen to the dogs. Would I be the jerk if I filed an animal noise complaint with the city against my neighbor? Well, what would you do in this situation? Would you file a noise complaint or not? Please let us know.
I'd be training like Rocky, then go over there and make him humble.
Don't walk on my rocks. This story takes place one morning more than halfway through my Army basic training at Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. 50 plus years later, some of the details are fuzzy or lost, but none of that really matters to the retelling of this tale. At the time of this malicious compliance, I had taken something to the company office for a drill sergeant and was returning to the training area. There wasn't any grass in our company area. It was just too dry for grass. Instead, we had rocks about the size of quarters and half dollars where you would normally expect grass. And the DIs had a rule: keep off my rocks. But this particular day, I didn't. I could have stayed on the concrete sidewalks, but I cut across the rocks, a distance of perhaps 30 feet rather than the 120 feet or so on the sidewalk, and it almost worked out fine. Almost. About 10 feet before I was back on concrete, out rang,
"Hold it right there, trainee."
It was my company's first sergeant. After a brief discussion of my error, he told me to
Never walk on my rocks. Now drop and give me 20
push-ups. So I did, and he walked into the building as I counted each one. I had become pretty familiar with this process over the past weeks. Let's just say I had plenty of practice. When you finished the assigned push-ups, you didn't just pop back to your feet. You called out, "Permission to rise, drill sergeant," and waited for said permission. I thought about just getting up and going about my business. I knew he expected me to do just that because he went inside. But at this moment, I realized it might be interesting to wait for a while in the front-leaning rest position, push-up position, right out in front of the company office. This began my malicious compliance. Perhaps a couple of minutes later, an officer, I think our company commander, came walking down the sidewalk from the parking lot. He paused and asked me what I was doing, so I told him. He said something like, "Okay," or "I see," and continued inside the building. About 20 seconds later, the window nearest me shot open and First Sergeant stuck his head out saying,
"You can get up, son. You can get up."
From the way he called out, I'm pretty sure he had been a bit embarrassed. The palms of my hands were a little sore for a couple of days, but it was well worth it. To Karen's husband, whose name isn't Chad, thank you so much for stopping the rant we both know she was building up to. You are a true hero. Now on with the story. This happened a few moments ago. I'm in the kitchen filling up the cleanser so I can spray my lobby down. I walk out carrying 2 spray jugs since no one else mixes any when they use it up. There's Karen and her husband, not Chad, standing in the lobby looking around, wondering where the night audit is. Me. "Good morning, how are you today?" Karen gives me a blank stare. Not Chad. Good morning to you. Karen.
I want to check out.
Me. We can make that happen for you. What's your room number? Karen.
This is my room number.
Me. Give me a moment and I'll get you some paper airplane material. Are you guest names here? And did you sleep well? Karen, debating on if she should let me have it, decides for the moment I'm not worth it.
I slept just fine till you checked someone in the room next door.
Me. Well, I do apologize that you were disturbed, but I only checked one guest in. That was at midnight, and they were on the opposite side of the hotel. Karen.
Whatever. Give me my receipt.
I hand over the receipt, and she stares at it for 10 minutes, then starts to walk out the door, stops, and turns around.
This isn't me. I said this room number.
Room right next door. Me. Oh, I do apologize. It's for the room she originally told me, but I'll take this on the chin. Karen.
Why did they pay less?
Me. You both paid through Hooking, so I don't have an answer for you on that. Hooking is a separate third-party organization that sets its own prices, and we do not change them at all. Not Chad breaks in as Karen's face starts to turn an ugly shade of red. I don't care. Get in the car, Karen. It's not worth arguing over $2. Karen at this point is visibly debating on if she should let us both have it, but Not Chad has left the building, so she rushes out to get in the car. Thanks, Not Chad. And thanks for taking one for the hotel front desk team. We appreciate your efforts. Entitled Mom is trying to force me to change my last name. My mom got married recently, and she and her husband have decided to hyphenate their names and form one family name. Her husband's kids and my half-siblings are all on board with changing their names to the hyphenated version. I am not on board with this for me. I've expressed this at least 20 times since it first came up. I don't want my name changed, and I will not stand up in court and consent. My mom is so upset. She has tried talking me around, tried offering me bribes to go along with it. Her husband has asked me why I'm against it, and I have told him straight. I like my name as it is, and it's my tie to my dad, who passed 2 years ago, and I don't want anyone taking or adding anything onto it. My name has been my name for 15 years, and no, just because I'm a girl doesn't mean I'll change it when I get married. So that's not an argument to use with me. I also pointed out I could do the same when I'm older and get married and hyphenate, and I don't want 3 last names, and his name would be the one to go in that circumstance, not my dad's. Both are pretty upset I won't work with them on this and agree to compromise a change. My mom has told me I'm being stubborn for the sake of being stubborn, and having a family name that brings us all together is nice, and I'm separating myself from that. Her husband told me I'm making him feel like there's something wrong with him/his name. I told him that was a him problem, and I had made my feelings clear. Am I the jerk? Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or her mom? Please let us know.
Definitely the mom. This is how to make your kids not want to have anything to do with you 101.
Idiot doesn't know how to use DoorDash. Let's be real. DoorDash is a plague unto this world. Ridiculous service fees, abysmal customer service, bad practices, few protections for the workforce, and the gig economy in general is a parasite on the industry. Now that the end of lockdown is on the horizon, its necessity has diminishing demand and should be excised for all but the few desperate establishments. Come out and eat, everyone. We're almost there. End rant, onto the story. It's Memorial Day weekend, graduations are in full swing, and there's optimism in the air. We are slam-a-bama jammin', and there's a healthy wait list. Phone is non-stop ringing, and the annoying DoorDash bell tone won't stop blingin'. We're still running with a skeleton crew, and the bottleneck of a small kitchen means we're already hitting 1 hour plus wait times on our to-go orders right from the outset. The volume won't stop, so eventually we have to put a pause on DoorDash orders once we hit the 90-plus minute mark. One of the last orders that snuck in before we shut it down was for a modest number of dishes that the customer had opted to pick up instead of using delivery. Hey, saves us like 20% off exorbitant fees. We've got our hustle in full swing, and this guy shows up to the window soon thereafter and says he's here to pick up an order for, let's say Karen. We're a little confused since none of the ready bags have that name, and no upcoming orders are listed under Karen. One of the hosts pulls up the DoorDash tablet and points at the 20th order down on the list. Was it this order? As she gives off the items. Yes, he says excitedly. I guess you showed up quite a bit early. It's still got more than an hour till it's ready. What? The app said it would be ready in 30 minutes. Not sure how that happened. We set the timer on that one for an hour and a half.
Oh no, my wife is gonna be very upset.
All right, well, it's still gonna be about an hour. Sorry about that.
He leaves in a huff.
Back in the flow until someone shows up at our window again. She's got her arms crossed and hungry for a confrontation.
Hello, I'm Karen. My husband just told me that our order is going to take over an hour.
I remain stoic. Yup, it's behind about 20 other tickets.
The app said it would be ready in 30 minutes.
I'm not sure how that happened. When we confirmed the order, we set the wait time to an hour and a half. I pull up the tablet to show her that there's still 62 minutes left.
Well, that's BS. I'm already here. So isn't there anything you can do to speed up the process?
Unfortunately, no. There's already several tickets ahead of you, and we've got a full house of dine-in service. It's going to be about an hour. She continues stewing.
Okay, I want to cancel my order.
That's fine, I understand. I can pull your ticket off the line, but you're going to have to get in your DoorDash app to cancel it so that you don't get charged. She stares down at her phone and angrily paces back to her car. My coworkers and I are looking at each other like, what the heck? Not even a few minutes later, she's back at the window looking more livid. She holds her phone out and starts jabbing her finger against the DoorDash app.
I can't log in.
She starts handing it over to me like she wants me to do it. I step back. I can't do that for you. All I can do on my end is pull the ticket off the line. She tries one more desperate plea.
I spent $70 here. Are you saying my money's no good? You can't make it faster?
$70 is a weird flex when there's a few orders ahead of hers in the $200 to $300 range. I couldn't help but chuckle, which honestly is not the best customer service response. She points at me sternly and says,
You're a jerk,
and wallows off. Guilty as charged, but also her problem, not mine. The entire staff and I are laughing about this because it's just so absurd. I give the owner a heads up and he laments. It feels like DoorDash brings us nothing but headaches. Don't you know it, brother? 5 minutes later, we get a phone call. It's Karen, and she's a lot more conciliatory.
Hi, I'm calling about earlier. If we still want our food, how long is it going to take?
I'm easygoing. I don't take crap, but I'm also in the business of trying to make people happy, so I don't take anything personal. The app now says 56 minutes. Let's see. We're still looking at roughly about an hour.
What?
I also hear her husband fully guffawing on speakerphone in their car.
We were just there 15 minutes ago and you told us an hour. Is this some game where you just keep telling us an hour until you eventually close and never make our order? We want our cash back.
I was fully on board with trying to help them out, but now I give no hoots. They ask to speak with a manager. I skip the line and ask the owner if he wants to share a piece of his mind. He gladly accepts. He's a super chill, easygoing guy, and after being on the phone for 15 minutes with them, I see new veins in his forehead. How'd it go? I ask. I was explaining things to them, and she told me to shut up and listen. No one talks to me like that. He gathers himself. Okay, forget DoorDash. We're deactivating the account. And like that, our prayers were answered. DoorDash may account for 20% of our business, but 90% of our headaches. Good riddance. Have you ever used DoorDash? And if so, did you like it? Please let us know.
I prefer to go get my food myself.
Neighbor thinks I'm the cleaner. So this happened Saturday morning. I live in a nice brand new apartment. It's great, and the few neighbors I've met have been pretty chill, with a few exceptions. Earlier in the week, some new neighbors moved into one of the apartments. Their movers left the front door open, and while they were moving furniture in, a whole bunch of dead leaves from outside blew into the hallway. It was a huge mess. My apartment is literally the first door once you enter the building, and every time I've come home since then, I've been walking on dead leaves. We do have the cleaners who come in about once or twice a week to clean the common areas, but Saturday morning, as I was cleaning my apartment, I decided to pop outside and sweep up some of the leaves. I decided to leave most of them for the cleaners and only focus on the ones that were between the entrance and my door, and a few leaves around there. Figured it's not my job to clean the whole place, and I'd just take care of the leaves that were bothering me. Well, one of my neighbors saw me sweeping up in my PJs with bedhead and decided I was one of the cleaners. She saw that I was tying up my garbage bag and folding up my broom and dustpan. They sort of fold together for compact storage. Crazy lady.
Hey, you're not done. Why are you getting ready to leave?
Me. Oh, hi. I am done. I was only sweeping the space between the hallway and my apartment.
Well, that's just lazy. Do your job and sweep the rest of the hallway. It's been filthy for days.
Me. Yeah, I know it's been filthy. That's why I decided to clean the spot between the front door and my door.
You live here? So why do you only clean once or twice a week? If you live here, you should be cleaning every day. Stop being so lazy.
Me. Ma'am, I'm not a cleaner, I'm a resident. The mess in the hallway bothered me, so I cleaned the part that was annoying me. If the rest of it bothers you, then clean it yourself. Karen.
How dare you? I'm going to call body corporate and have you fired and thrown out of this building.
Me. Ma'am, I own this apartment and I own my own business. I do not work for our apartment's body core organization, and I am not a cleaner. I live here. The mess bothered me, so I cleaned it. If the rest of the mess bothers you, then you clean it. I'm not your servant and not going to do it for you.
Well then, why are you cleaning the hallway? You think I'm stupid? No one would clean the hallway unless they were getting paid.
Or unless they don't want to trek dead leaves into their home every time they get back.
Well, if you really are doing this on your own, you won't mind sweeping up the rest of the halls, so do it.
Me. Yeah, no. Had you asked me politely, I might have considered it. But after this exchange, you can either do it yourself or wait for the cleaners to come do it. I'm gonna go back inside and continue cleaning my place. Nice meeting you though. I walked in and she started banging on my door for a while, but I just threw some Disturbed on my stereo and let David Draymond drown out her knocks. Didn't end well though. I went out later to throw away my trash in the dumpster downstairs. This crazy jerk, I suspect, didn't actually see her, but who else would do it, had swept all of the leaves in front of my door. So I grabbed my trusty broom and swept them all further down the hall to her door. Have a feeling we're gonna be playing this game until the cleaners show up. Maybe I'll borrow my buddy's leaf blower and just rev it up outside her door. It is pretty loud. Am I the jerk for not allowing my father-in-law to have a say in my baby's name? Me, 30, male, and my father have the same initials. We have the same last name, but different first and middle names. My wife's first name also starts with the same letter as mine. She took my name when we got married, so we have the same first and last initials. When we got pregnant with our oldest, 7, male, we followed the tradition of having the same initials as me as well as my dad. My son shares the same middle and last name, but has a different first name than myself and my father. We thought it was cute. When our second child was born, 4, female, we wanted to continue the tradition, but she has the same initials as my wife instead of me. My wife, 29, is currently pregnant with our last kid. This pregnancy has taken a large toll on my wife, so we've made the decision for me to get snipped once baby comes. My wife is her father's only kid. We have an okay relationship. He tries to butt in a lot when it comes to our parenting, but we shut him down pretty well. Anyways, once we found out my wife was pregnant, we picked one girl name and one boy name. If it's a boy, he will have the same initials as me and his brother. If it's a girl, she will have the same initials as her mother and sister. We have just learned it's a boy and have his name picked out. We shared our news a week ago. My wife was on a video call with her dad, updating him on everything and shared baby's name. He said that because this will be our last kid and his final grandkid, he thinks he should get a say in the name. My wife asked what he meant, and he said he would want the baby to be named after him or share a middle name. He even suggested doing something that honors his military career, like naming him after my father-in-law's favorite general. My wife said that while she understands his desire, we have already selected our son's name. We thought that was the end of it. We recently ran into a buddy of his, and he expressed how upset father-in-law was over not being included in our son's name. How our tradition was tacky, and how we can allow my father-in-law a say in one of the grandkids' names, or we should just have another one after this baby if we like our current name so much. We kinda just walked away, but my wife is furious, and honestly, so am I. I care for my father-in-law, but these are our kids. My wife is struggling enough with her current pregnancy. I called him and expressed it was kind of low of him to go around spreading our business or suggesting my wife keep popping kids out. If he wanted to name a kid so bad, he should go have another. He hung up and hasn't spoken to us since. So, am I the jerk? Edit. I want to thank everyone for the nice words. I appreciate all the concern for my wife and our new baby. I can see that I'm not the jerk for wanting to keep our tradition going, but I can see how my father-in-law may feel left out and how I should have definitely gone off on his friend instead of him. So I'll be phoning him in a few days and see how we can fix this. He's a great guy, father, and grandfather, so I want him to feel welcomed in our family. Edit 2. I'm getting this a lot, but some people seem to think there's some big, long generational thing my side of the family did as far as initials. It's literally just my dad and I who have the same initials. We did this for our oldest because when he was born, my dad was passing. My wife requested we do this since he would not be around to see our son grow up. We continued it with our daughter because it would be weird for her to have a completely different name versus myself, my wife, and her brother, which is why we are doing this for our final kid. My dad has since passed. We are both no contact with our mothers, so my father-in-law is my kid's only grandparent. He certainly isn't being left out of their lives or anything. We aren't doing this as some grand forget you like many of you are suggesting. Final edit. Guys, please stop suggesting father-in-law get a dog or something. He's already got 2, Reginald and Turnip. He's already got a boat and a motorcycle too, so he doesn't need anything else to be named. And please stop suggesting he have another baby. My wife will be 30 in a couple of months, and I really don't think she wants to help raise our kid and her brother at the same time. Blockbuster scheduled me for 120 plus hours in the 2 weeks after I quit. This happened decades ago, and I'm not afraid to say it happened in a Blockbuster. I had a terribly uptight, power-hungry manager who refused to listen and hated me for standing up to her. She wrote me up because she didn't recognize you could reverse an order in the system. She wrote me up for a mistake another manager made, and she wrote me up for not coming to a 9 a.m. meeting after closing until 2 a.m. the night before. Anyway, the actual story. In the final year of high school, I put in my 2 weeks notice that my last day of work would be December 15th. I didn't want to handle the Christmas rush. I wanted to see my friends New Year's Eve, and also it was a terrible job. On December 15th, I go to drop off my uniform shirt and pick up my last paycheck. On my way out of the office area, I noticed the schedule. My name is scheduled to work 8 to 10 hours a day for most of Christmas break, the whole week preceding Christmas, Christmas Eve until 2 a.m., Christmas Day, the intervening week, New Year's Eve until 2 a.m., and New Year's Day. The following conversation ensued. Me: Hey manager, you know I'm not working here anymore, right? Manager: If your name is on the schedule, you have to work. You know that. Me: I don't work here anymore. Your name wasn't in the holiday time off folder, so you got put on the schedule. Next time, request off earlier. Me: I don't work here anymore. If you're going to walk out on your shift, you're required to find someone to cover for you. At this point, a customer is eavesdropping while pretending to browse the recently returned but not yet shelved cart of movies. I address him. Me: Excuse me, sir. Are you available to cover my shift on Christmas Eve? Manager: He doesn't work here. Me: Neither do I. I wish I could say I threw my uniform shirt at her and everyone clapped, but she followed me to my car, yelling at me. She then called my parents on Christmas Eve and told my mother she failed to raise a worthwhile kid, and I had to file formal complaints. Bonus points. After that, she was put on leave and the assistant manager had to cover New Year's Eve. Unfortunately, with all the drama about the general manager being too stupid to know that I had already quit, there was nobody else scheduled to work on New Year's Eve. Entitled Mom at a Campground expects me to have a shirt for her kid to tie-dye, throws world-class tantrum when I don't. So my boyfriend and I went camping this weekend at a campground, and we met this couple and their son, who was around 7, while we were setting up our tent, and they were setting up at the plot next to ours. We had some polite small talk, and we mentioned that we bought a tie-dye kit to tie-dye a couple of t-shirts while we were there. It was really just a small cheap tie-dye kit, and we both brought 2 shirts to make. The mother immediately got excited and said her son would love to do tie-dye with us later that night. We were caught off guard, but I was sure there'd be some extra dye, and I didn't really care that much, so I said sure. A few hours of hiking and fishing go by, and then we're ready to go back and settle into our campsite, eat dinner, and start making our t-shirts. We round the corner towards camp, and it was as if this kid was waiting for us. He was right at the path and then sprinted back to his campsite. Once we got closer, his mother stomped over to the trail, and this is how this conversation went. Entitled Mom: Where have you guys been? We've waited hours. Me: We've been hiking, but he can come use it in a little bit once we set it up. I was totally caught off guard that she even approached me that way, but I blew it off again. Like, did this lady expect me to alter my plans all day to cater to her kid? We get to our campsite, and I'm about to start dinner, but this lady and her kid are just staring at us. So I decide to just get the dye ready so he can bring his stupid t-shirt over and leave us alone so we can eat in peace. I bring the tie-dye out and they come over to our table, empty-handed, entitled Mom.
Looks great. He's a small or a medium.
Me. What? I don't have anything for him to use. I thought you had your own t-shirt that you wanted to tie-dye. Entitled Mom.
No, you are the ones who brought the tie-dye kit. We waited all day for you to get back. And now you're saying that you don't even have a t-shirt for him?
Me. I don't know what to tell you. We only have 4 t-shirts to make for ourselves.
I can't believe you told my son that he could tie-dye and got his hopes up. He waited for you all day. Can he have one of yours?
Me. Absolutely not, I said while laughing.
It's not funny. Don't laugh at me.
At that point, I'm just like, whatever, lady, and we keep snickering at her until they storm back to their campsite, where she starts playing metal music full blast. It's hilarious. She was insane, throwing a full-blown tantrum and glaring at us from afar. An hour or so later, the ranger comes over to our tent and said he got a report that we were drinking. We were drinking, but they typically don't care unless we're disturbing other campers, and we were just 2 people sitting and eating dinner quietly. I told them what happened, and he thought it was hilarious, and I jokingly said that I'd like to make a counter-report about Entitled Mom's music. He was like, heck yeah, I'll do that, and went over to her. She threw a fit when he told her to turn that crap down, and I heard her screaming about how we're partying and drinking, and how dare he confront her and not us. Eventually, her husband turned her music off while she was mid-screech, then she sulked into her tent and never came back out, and the ranger came back over to our site for a beer after dark. We considered calling her poor husband over for a beer too, but decided not to poke the bear. You can absolutely wait to speak to the owner. Just found this sub and wanted to share my story from more than 20 years ago. I was attending grad school at the time to finish my doctoral degree, which I'm only mentioning as it's relevant because the customer made a crack about intelligence, while working at my father's business, an auto salvage yard. Our yard was located in New Jersey, and this event occurred in August, so it was hot and very humid. I was generally very dirty when I was at work, with grease and grime all over my arms and clothes. If you washed your hands and arms every time they looked dirty, your skin would just get dry and irritated. So with the exception of stopping to eat, I was absolutely filthy all day long. Our yard mostly dealt with shops and small independent mechanics who came in looking just as dirty as I was, so it was completely normal. Another point relative to this story is this. I look absolutely nothing like my father. He is 5'8" and weighs at most 140 pounds, and I'm 6'2". And back then I was powerlifting and weighed right around 220 pounds. So here's my story. A guy comes in to pick up something he bought when I was not there that had to be taken out of a car. I don't even remember what it was now, but it was something fairly heavy, for him, not for me, and dirty. If we had parts in our warehouse, they'd get scrubbed and cleaned by me before being labeled and cataloged, but parts coming right off a car just had the loose grime knocked off. So the guy comes in looking very out of place for our yard, wearing a button-down shirt, khakis, and dress shoes. He hands me his receipt, and I tell him I'll bring it out the side door. I walk out with his item on a hand truck, and the only vehicle I see parked is an Acura sedan. Very unlike the beat-up shop vehicles most of our customers drove. The guy is walking around the front of his car talking on his phone, but the trunk is open, so I bring the hand truck around and leave his item on the ground with a piece of cardboard to keep his trunk clean and go back inside. A few minutes later, he comes inside wanting to know what he is supposed to do with the part, to which I facetiously reply, "Install it, I imagine." He wants to know why the part is dirty. I replied, "It's used." He wants to know how he is supposed to get it home. I reply, "In your car." He wants to know why I didn't put the item in his truck, and I point to the sign behind him, which admittedly is partially obscured by the open door, which says that we are not responsible for loading parts due to liability for possible damage to the customer's vehicle. He turns around, looking upset, and shouts, "What am I supposed to do now, genius?" Because I must be dumb if I'm dirty, right? There are now 2 other customers by the office, and I know them both well, so I tell them I'll be right with them and walk around outside to the guy's car because I just want him gone. I throw a blanket over the rear bumper of his car, remind him that I'm not liable for damage, and I lift the piece up and gently put it on the cardboard in his car. To do this without damaging anything, I had to put one of my hands on the side of the trunk, and I left a huge greasy handprint, largely on purpose. While I'm loading, he is standing so close to me, supervising, that my arm bumps his arm and his sleeve gets dirty. The entire time this exchange has been going on, he's been on his phone, and he's now ranting into his phone about our interaction, and he calls me genius again. And I reply, "You came to a salvage yard to pick up a heavy, dirty, used part and dress clothes with a luxury car. Who's the genius?" At that point, he also noticed the grease on his car and his dirty sleeve, and he wants to know if the owner is here. And I tell him Bob is working out in the yard. He demands to speak to him, and I say fine. We walk back around to the office, and I point to Bob, who is way out in the yard on his forklift moving cars that are going to the crusher. This is time sensitive because the truck will come to pick them up and block the entire street while we load, so we have to be ready. He starts to walk into the yard, and I try to stop him and tell him it's too dangerous. He keeps walking, so I point out that our Doberman is trotting along behind the forklift. She was actually our dog from home and very friendly, but we brought her with us every day because we couldn't get home to let her out. He sees the dog and stops, and I tell the guy he has to wait until Bob is finished moving vehicles, and it will be a while, which he says is fine because he's going to tell Bob exactly how his customers are being treated. Over the next 40 minutes, I walk past the guy multiple times helping customers, and each time I pass him, he mutters something about being fired and me being sorry. Finally, the forklift shuts down, and Bob stands up, and my new friend seems ecstatic, banging on the counter and telling me that Bob is done and he wants to speak to him immediately. I walk outside with my new friend right next to me, climb up on a car's fender and wave my arms to get Bob's attention and scream, "Hey Dad, this guy wants to talk to you." And with that, my new buddy says, "Forget you," turns and walks out, hops in his car and guns it up the street. Fired? Are you sure? Okay. Note 1. This story was told to me by a friend and it's about her father. It takes place around 2005. Note 2. This happened in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee is past the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. So, my friend's father, who has since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were so unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies, from multiple countries taking weeks, if not months, to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was a no BS kind of guy who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy old engineer who really knew his thing and was always ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interest, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards that he cared little for. But anyway, during his many years with this employer, by all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge, and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective coworkers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate. And he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to a head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in, and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the three managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately canceled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols, and the company was aware of and had approved his side business, and he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business signed by his former manager and the IT policy available and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he had. Patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay. All duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to snipe him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate that he made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and/or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at, and replied with something like, "I'm sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision, but until then he was happy to consult for them at 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept, and then he sprung the patent issues on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and a reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board ruled in his and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages, 3 months pay damage and 24 months pay severance package, including pension and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as a jerk tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations, and the costs of her father's consultancy fees and the costs of the labor board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big crap-eating grin and, "What are you gonna do? Fire me?" after that. I'm suing my parents. Okay, it sounds bad, but hear me out. I, 18 female, was 16 at the start of this story, which is important. So because of my birthday and skipping a grade, I graduated high school at 16. At the time, I took a gap year and got a paid internship. With no bills other than a few purchases, I was able to save the majority of my pay, which is around $12,000. Once the year was up, I applied to multiple schools in and out of my state. My parents knew this. Well, I'm guessing they didn't think I'd get into the ones out of state because they were very upset once I started getting acceptance letters. Surprisingly, the ones out of state were giving me large scholarships that would cover either all or most of my schooling. Well, only one in-state gave me a full ride, and truthfully, it was my backup, so to me it was a no-brainer to pick an out-of-state school. My parents didn't want this, so they made a deal. Pick an in-state school to complete my associates in, and they would cover whatever the scholarship didn't, as well as getting me a cash car and a reasonable apartment. Well, I reached out to my school of choice, and they said I could put off my admission if I did in fact reapply with my associates. So I went with my parents' plan. Well, they got the car, and I had to live my first year in a dorm and get an apartment the second year. Now it's time for them to pay for my second year, what the scholarship won't cover, and my apartment, and they're telling me that I'm an adult, 18, and need to be responsible for myself, i.e. refusing to get the apartment and pay for school. I told them that this was not our agreement, and they told me it's not like I can't afford it, which is true. Working part-time and doing tutoring, I've put an additional $6,000 in my savings the past year. Well, at the time of the agreement, I got the agreement written and notarized, so I told them that I would get it legally enforced if they didn't come through. Obviously, they didn't take kindly to this, and I'd hate to sue my own parents, but I feel like I've worked so hard only for them to try and back out now. Edit. Since the legality of the contract is a popular theme, I'll put this in. The contract is legally enforceable. They had to sign a separate document allowing me, a minor, to enter a contract. At the time, I told them I wouldn't take their offer if I didn't have a way to cover my butt. For those wondering how a kid was so savvy, I'm going to law school. Updates. So, I had another conversation with my parents. My mom was upset that I'm so serious about taking them to court. She said that I was selfish and spoiled, and that they have sacrificed enough and it was time for them to live their lives. She ended up walking out and telling me she was ashamed to have such a daughter. As much as this hurt me, my dad was more receptive after my mom left, and he apologized and asked if I'd be willing to compromise and stay in the dorm if they paid for my school. I told him this was fine under the condition the balance was paid by the end of June rather than the final day, August, because while I appreciate his apology, I can no longer trust them. I didn't tell him thus, but this would give me enough time to pay the balance myself, worst case scenario, and hire a lawyer should he not come through. I also had planned on taking a break this summer and not working, but seeing as I might have to potentially pay for school and a lawyer, I'll be getting a job and door dashing to put as much in my savings as possible. Well, what would you do in this situation? Would you go ahead and sue your parents or not? Please let us know.
Once you sign a legally binding contract, you don't have a choice. Sorry, Mom and Dad.
Entitled Aunt nearly ruins free vacation. This story happened before lockdown. I love Ireland. My grandmother told me stories and inspired a pride and love for my heritage and taught me how to properly represent myself. I am not Irish, but my ancestors were. Years ago, I started studying Gaelic, the Irish language. I'm still very novice at speaking and understanding it, but I enjoy trying to learn and like hearing it spoken. I was starting to think about another trip when one of my cousins contacts me. We never had much contact because we grew up so far apart, but I liked him well enough. He had started learning Gaelic and was interested in having someone to practice with, so we did. We helped each other and learned together. It's difficult language, and like I said, still very novice. Well, I was planning a trip to Ireland. I had been a few times, but this time I wanted to stay in the Gaeltacht, the regions of Ireland where Gaelic is primarily spoken instead of English. The people there speak English, but as a second language. I thought my cousin would enjoy a trip as well. I spoke with my uncle and we made a deal. Since cousin was in his first year of college, I told him if he finished his freshman year with at least a 3.5 GPA, I would pay for him to go with me. He worked really hard and was taking mostly honors classes and came out with a 3.4. I, of course, let him feel a little grief from trying so hard only to come up short, then told him that he was still going with me. You could say I shouldn't have, but he genuinely worked very hard and I believe he earned it. Plus, he's a good kid, and I want to encourage him to keep working hard in his education. Now for a little quick background. My cousin's parents. Aunt C and Uncle T are people of limited means. Not speaking poorly of them, Uncle T works hard to give them a comfortable life. Aunt C is my dad's sister, and the grandmother I mentioned earlier is her mom. Uncle T is the son of Italian immigrants. While trying to put Cousin B through school, they couldn't afford to send him on vacation, but I assured them the whole trip was on me. I actually was splurging a bit because I wanted it to be an awesome experience for Cousin B. I got business class seats for the flight and booked 2 rooms on a really nice bed and breakfast. I was excited. My cousin was so pumped he was shaking. Then Uncle T calls me. He asked if there was any chance I could include him and Aunt C on the trip. He understood it was a huge thing to ask and stressed that it was no pressure. I thought about it a bit and decided I would bring them along. My grandmother would have praised the generosity. I told him that since it was so close to the trip, I could only get them economy seats, and he said that was fine. I also managed to book another room at the B&B. I also expressed that the purpose of this trip was for Cousin B and I to interact with native Gaelic speakers, but there would be some time for sightseeing. We could also visit the town our ancestors came from in County Mayo. This is where I learned what a Karen my Aunt C is. It started at the airport. I had managed to upgrade their tickets to Economy Plus, which on an international flight is not too bad. But my aunt was saying that Cousin and I should sit there while the grown-ups get the nice seats. I was 30 at that time. My cousin was 19. My uncle looked embarrassed. She told Cousin B to give her his ticket, and he almost did. I had to nip this in the bud. I paid for all of these seats, so I will determine who sits where. Those are still nice seats. Enjoy your flight. Aunt C. Oh, so since you paid for everything, you think you're in charge? Me. Yes, and if you don't like it, you can go home. She huffed but stayed silent. Uncle T gave me a wink, and Cousin B apologized for his mom's behavior. At one point, he quietly said to himself, "She always does this." Great. We arrive in Ireland and took a cab to our bed and breakfast. The first 2 days were great. Cousin B and I went out and tried to awkwardly converse with the locals who were as gracious as you could wish for and helped us a lot. We mostly did stuff separately from Uncle and Aunt, which was fine, but I noticed Aunt was getting a little edgy. And on our 4th morning at breakfast, she snapped. One of the girls working at the B&B brought them their breakfast and apparently greeted them in Gaelic, like she did every morning. This was the point where everyone there began to hear, "Does anyone in this place speak English? Oh God, it's like being in a foreign country. My grandmother lived her whole life here. She could speak English. Why can't you?" Before I could appreciate that my aunt had actually said, "It's like being in a foreign country," I was out the door and running across the yard. I apologized to the poor girl and gave her a €50 note, then went to talk to my aunt. "Do you not understand what I told you about this part of Ireland? I thought I explained that Irish Gaelic is the primary language spoken here. Most people will start interactions in Irish, and it is a big part of the B&B's business too." She just sat in her room looking huffy, and Uncle T told me he'd handle it. He had fallen in love with Ireland and had been thoroughly enjoying the trip, so I let him deal with it. Then went to talk to the landlady to ensure we wouldn't be thrown out. She didn't tolerate mistreatment of her staff, but said if it happened again, they would have to leave. That day, I had rented a car and would be driving out to where my ancestors originally lived near Castlebar. I invited Aunt and Uncle, but Aunt just stayed in the room. So the 3 of us went without her. It was an emotional thing visiting the little village, and I can't describe it, but Cousin and I both felt like we could feel the spirits of our ancestors there. I know it's corny, but it was powerful. We found the graves of some of them as well. Uncle was mostly silent and respectfully let us experience it. Later, he told us about his parents leaving Italy. Rest of the trip was pretty quiet, but Aunt C never left the room or spoke to anyone there. Although she did charge a pretty expensive lunch to the room, my card, through a local high-class restaurant. Uncle T offered to pay me back for it, but I refused. We flew back, and the whole flight, Cousin was going on and on about how amazing it was. It was clear that he had found a new love for international travel. So I told him if he keeps his grades up, maybe we could go next summer. It became a regular trip for us, but never again brought the parents, except for his final year. I was not going to have the time off to go, but thought I would mix it up. For a graduation gift, I sent him and Uncle T to Italy to see where that part of his family was from. I intentionally left out Aunt C, and she was upset about it, but never got back to me. though I heard she was deeply insulted. If anyone is wondering if I had other cousins, aunts, or uncles who were jealous, the answer is yes. My dad has 6 siblings, and all of them have kids in a wide spectrum of ages. When asked why I never brought any of them, I said it was because Cousin B was the only one to show any serious interest in our heritage and the language. While granted, most of our trips involved failing to converse with people, then saying, "oh well," and heading to the pub, it was still a fun challenge for us. However, if any other cousins wanted to show a serious interest in the language, they would be welcome. None did. Have you ever visited another country? And if so, where did you go to? Please let us know.
One of these days, I'd really love to go to Karentopia.
Don't lie to the residents. Was reminded of this little occurrence from a few years back today. Thought I'd share it. Don't know if it's malicious in the traditional sense, but I did follow instructions to the letter and embarrassed the one giving instructions, so I don't know. Tell me what you think. So about 3 years ago, I worked for a care home. I still do work for a care home, but I also did 3 years ago. It's primarily nursing care with a little dementia care. The residents can range from being totally independent and capable of going about their day with minimal assistance from staff to end-of-life care with checks every half hour to make sure there's always someone with them. The particular resident I'm going to be talking about here we'll call Dot, because she looked like the EastEnders character of the same name, only with a thick Liverpudlian accent. Dot had a great sense of pride and a low tolerance for anyone she believed was talking down to her. She was largely independent, just had a few funny turns here and there. I was working a night shift when this happened, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and it was around midnight. My colleague was setting up breakfast trays for the morning, I believe, whilst the nurse was doing a few clerical duties. We had a nurse from an agency due to ours being ill. Agency workers can be a mixed bag here. Some are lovely, hardworking, and understanding. Some are grumpy and uptight. Some we politely ask if they don't get sent again. The nurse that night fell squarely into the middle category. She would be snippy with the care staff, opting to do her work without any communication to us unless it was absolutely necessary to hand anything over to us. Fair enough, nobody says you have to make friends here, and would treat the residents with a false smile and a semi-condescending tone, sort of like you'd expect one to use when talking to kids. Dot was going through one of her funny turns. She had put her coat on and was trying to barge her way out of the front door. I came across the reception area to find the nurse trying to talk with Dot trying to get to the front door saying, "Get out of the way, you miserable old trout," to the nurse. The nurse was saying things like,
"I'm sorry, Miss Dot, but we need to look after you here. It would be irresponsible of us to allow you to wander about outside at this time. You could seriously hurt yourself. Look, it's dark outside."
All things that seemed to make Dot angrier and angrier. After a while, Dot stormed off. I asked the nurse why Dot wanted to get out of the home.
"Because she has dementia."
Yes, but why in her own mind is she trying to leave? In her mind, it makes perfect sense for her to leave the home. What's her reasoning?
"Oh, she wants to go to the pharmacy. What difference does that make? We can't allow the residents out unsupervised for any reason, and especially not in the dead of night."
I'll talk to her.
"No, you will not. I know how people like you work. You'll say anything to keep the residents happy, even if it means filling their heads with lies. Well, I was taught that we have to be honest with the residents."
And this is true. You can't tell a resident an outright lie, at least not where I work. If a resident with dementia is distraught because their mother hasn't given them a phone call, you cannot say to them something like, "Oh, but she did ring you about a couple of hours ago, remember?" However, it's kind of frowned upon to say something like, "She passed 20 years ago. She can't use the phone," honest as it may be. You have to learn to use tact, omit details if they could cause distress, and treat the residents with some modicum of dignity. Anyway, somehow I convinced the nurse to let me speak to Dot. The nurse said that if she sees me lie to Dot, she will file a report, and sees that the home manager knows that I am institutionalizing the residents, which is a very, very serious accusation here. We made our way to Dot's room. She's angrily stuffing things into her handbag at the time. The nurse folded her arms and stood in the doorway as I spoke to Dot. "Dot? What do you want, OP? What are you getting all dressed up for? Is something special happening?"
"I need to go to the pharmacy. They have my medicine."
"But Dot, it's Sunday. The pharmacy isn't open on Sunday." Dot stopped in her tracks. For the first time, she looked confused rather than angry.
Is it?
Yes, Dot. Look, here's your clock. It says today's date on it, and it says Sunday. See? Dot made a sheepish face to this.
Oh, oops. I suppose I'd better get settled. I do actually feel rather sleepy.
I left Dot to it. When I walk out the door, the nurse is stunned that I had handled it so easily. She tried to sputter out that it was still filling the resident's head with lies for the sake of a quiet life. I just asked her, "What day is it right now?" And she didn't have an answer. The nurse tried to speak to my colleague about my behavior later that night. My colleague basically told her that what I did was the same thing she would have done. When Dot had her funny turns, she would argue with you about the time of day, how safe it was outside, etc. But as you got to know the residents, you got to know what kind of advice they'd be willing to listen to. Anyway, there's the time an angry resident calmed down and a grouchy nurse got egg on her face. Hope you enjoyed. Boss says I don't know anything yet, so I do the absolute bare minimum. Some background. I started my first full-time office job in corporate America a week after college. It was an industry I hadn't worked in before, and I needed to be licensed. The company that hired me, we'll call them Smith Inc., paid for my licensing fees, study materials, classes, etc. for me to become licensed. The total cost was about $500. It was a sweet deal. They gave me approximately 90 days paid to study a textbook and pass an online course. I didn't have to do any work for the company, simply study and pass the licensing exam. It was pretty easy, and I passed on my first try. My boss, let's call her Mary, was super excited that I passed, and I began training under an associate-level coworker who had just been promoted from the position I was in. The coworker, Jen, was super great and helpful. She began training me on 2 simple tasks that I could do. The only rule was if the client had a question specifically about their contract, I would ask Jen or forward it to my team lead. Well, I ended up getting an email from a client about their contract, and I video called Jen to ask how to handle. She walked me through it as I shared my screen with her. I wrote the email back to the client exactly how she told me, and she read the email before sending. A month goes by and everything is great. I'm learning and getting more comfortable. Then I get a really nasty email from Mary. She CCs my whole team into the email, going on and on about how I cannot answer contract questions and how she's gone over this with me before. She hadn't. Jen was the one who told me I can't answer contract questions. Both Jen and I tried to explain what happened and that Jen was the one who wrote the email. I just typed what Jen said and sent it from my email since the client emailed me and not Jen. Mary then calls the team up in a video call and goes on about how I don't know anything and I just started and I really don't know how this industry works and that answering contract questions is out of my job description. It went on for about 5 minutes. I say okay and get off of the call crying. The next day, out of pure pettiness, I simply do the absolute bare minimum. I don't know anything, right, Mary? I still complete all my tasks and everything that's required of me. Anything more advanced that I would normally try to learn with Jen's help? Nope. I just forwarded it to our team lead and said, "Sorry, Mary said I can't do anything outside of my job description." Work was less stressful after I decided to listen to Mary, and what many others told me before. Don't do anything outside of your job description. Also, Mary later fired me for being a whistleblower when I reported the company to health authority for violating lockdown protocols. I sleep better at night knowing how much money Mary wasted on training me. Register 10 is open. I spent 10 years working in various locations of the 2 major US toy store chains before a certain private equity firm managed to contribute to the closure of both. This is a story from the big box store and took place around 1999. Like many big box stores, the store where I was working at the time of this story had over a dozen register lanes. Also, like many big box stores, there were seldom more than 2 assigned cashiers, with other staff assigned as backup. The store I worked at had recently been remodeled with a video game shop in a front corner of the store, with 4 registers in that section, registers 11 through 14. The primary cashiers were put on those registers. Have to have someone looking out for those pricey video games, so customers who wanted to check out had to walk into the video game section to get to an open register. On the day in question, I was the first backup cashier. This was irritating because I had work I had to get done, and also because the manager that day had a tendency to call for backup when the lines got longer than 2 people. I'm working towards the back of the store, stocking shelves, helping customers, doing what I do, when I hear the call. Pimento cheesehead to your register. Pimento cheesehead, please come to your register. So I drop what I'm doing and head to the front. Now, my register was not by the video section. It was the closest register to that section that wasn't actually in it, if that makes sense. So any customer wanting to leave the lines had a bit more to do than just step up to the next register. They had to leave the video section and come 10 or 15 feet to where the other registers were set up. If this sounds confusing, that's okay. It was just as confusing to our customers in person. I get to my register and log in and get on the PA to announce in my best friendly customer service voice, "Register 10 is open with no lines and no waiting. If you'd like to step down to register 10, surprisingly, none of the 4 people waiting in line moved to my register, if they even heard the announcement. So after a few moments, I repeat it. "Register 10 is open with no lines and no waiting. If you'd like to step down to register 10. Again, there's no motion, though 2 of the people in line did kind of look up to see if they could figure out where register 10 was. After a few moments more, I pick up the PA again and start talking. "Register 10 is open with no lines and no waiting. If you'd like to step down to register 10, open right now for a quick and easy checkout. No lines or waiting, and I'm happy to serve you right now at register 10. You can easily locate register 10 by the lighted 10 at the top of the register right here at register 10, where I am open for a quick and easy checkout." That may be an abbreviated version. A woman finally comes to my register and she's cracking up and asks with a big grin, "Is this register open?" I inform her that it is indeed open, thank her for coming down to register 10, ring her up and get her out the door with a quick and easy checkout, natch, and look up. There's no longer a line at the other 2 registers, so I head back to my assigned tasks. I got written up for that, for being unprofessional. Can't risk having any fun in a toy store, but it was absolutely worth it. Am I the jerk for telling my husband that he is in fact just like his father? I'm 31, female, and my husband, who's 31, and I have 4 kids. A son who's 9, a daughter who's 8, and twins who are 5. My husband and I were over the moon when we had our first 2 kids, and we're just very excited. The twins were a huge surprise, considering twins aren't common in either of our families, but we decided to keep them. However, my husband's attitude towards the twins has completely changed. I know it's tiring. We have other small kids running around too, but it's not like we're overwhelmed. My mother, who is still very young and fit, lives with us, and she usually takes care of the kids when she can. We aren't short on money either, as both of us come from pretty wealthy families. However, I know that sometimes that isn't even enough when it comes to parenting, so I decided to leave it. However, instead of moping around or just being distant, he's become pretty mean with the twins. He's always finding something to shout at them for. I kid you not, he shouts at them for being identical, as if they purposely planned it. Plus, he's the perfect dad with the other kids. He only acts like this with the twins. I had enough yesterday when my youngest asked me why dad doesn't like him and whether I want him to disappear too. There's absolutely no way that my kid is lying about something like this. I don't think he has the mental ability to make up things like that either. I was furious and confronted my husband, who was sound asleep in his room. I asked him what his problem was and why he was being such a jerk. He was confused, so I explained. He then accused my son of lying and saying nonsense. Obviously, I didn't believe him and told him that he was exactly like his father. He got upset and left the house. I don't know where he went, and honestly, I don't give a hoot. Side note, husband's father was, in short, a real jerk. Very absent and cheated on his wife a lot. My husband vowed to never be like him and gets very heated at the mention of his dad. Anyways, my mother, who heard the whole thing go down, told me that I did the right thing by shouting at him, but I should not have mentioned his father. My sister, who I called later, said the same and told me to make a post on here just to see. So, am I the jerk for telling my husband that he is exactly like his jerk father? Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or her husband? Please let us know.
He needs to stop treating those babies like that. It ain't right, I tell you.
Grandpa wants to threaten me for my money? I'll take you to jail myself. Very odd title, I know, so let me give you some backstory. This occurred several years ago. My grandfather is one of those Machiavellian types who could care less who he rips off. He spent the majority of his adult life in prison, including from the time I was 6 years old until I was 18. Essentially, he can't stay clean or away from crime. The lengthy stay during my childhood was for robbing a bank. After release, he's constantly stealing from his very elderly mother and doing every underhanded thing he can think of to avoid having to actually work. So after I graduate, I begin to work in the corrections field. After a couple years in prisons, I managed to land a great job with a county home confinement office. This was great until my grandpa decided to rob a pharmacy and is placed on home confinement as a condition of his bond. I lived in another county than he did, but he managed to come to the city I live in to commit the crime, thus forcing him to find residents in my town to serve his home confinement. So he gets placed on home confinement, and I explain to my supervisor, who I have a great relationship with, the situation. My supervisor doesn't really worry about it because he understands I have no real relationship with him and I'm not going to treat him any different than anybody else on our caseload. Everything goes fine for a couple of weeks until my grandpa starts texting me when he knows I am on call to try and get out of the house. I tell him that I can't let him do that, and he begrudgingly accepts that. Over time, he's constantly trying to get favors more and more. Family members asking me to deliver him money and groceries because I live in the same town, etc. Eventually, he gets hard up for money because his family source has cut him off and starts asking me. I tell him I can't do that, and even if I could, I didn't have the money to give him. He isn't having that, so he decides to threaten to leave home and come to my house and tell my supervisor I gave him permission. Obviously, if he did this, it would show on GPS that he was at my house, and that would look bad no matter what the circumstances. I decide to call his bluff, and because of the escalation, I figured it was time to handle the situation before he takes it any further. The next morning, I tell my supervisor he should call him in for a random drug screen. This happens, and to no surprise, he hits positive. This puts him in violation of his terms of release, and I have the honors of putting him in handcuffs and driving him to jail myself. Upon his court date, because I was the one who charged him with violating home confinement, I got to go to the court hearing to find out if they would reinstate him. The judge asked if the home confinement office is okay with taking him back. Our local judges always ask us this on violations. I told him no, so my grandpa had to spend the next 8 months in jail.
Do this next. Tap here on your screen to come see our new podcast playlist, where you'll find thousands of hours of the best stories you've ever heard. Or tap the one on the right. That episode is specifically just for you, based on other videos you've enjoyed the most.